Chapter 384. The street below the inn fell silent for a moment. The pedestrians and peddlers raised their heads, looking in astonishment at the place where the shout had come from. They saw Chen Chongqing, and then they heard his next words. "I am Chen Chongqing. Su Li is in the room behind me. Whether you want to kill him or save him, those who want to come, hurry up and come." Just like the previous words, these words similarly drifted through the bright and beautiful spring sunshine of Xuanyang City, drifting extremely quickly and extremely far. Presumably, they would very quickly leave the city and travel to various parts of the continent. Countless gazes fell on the window of the inn, fell on Chen Chongqing's face. The streets of Xuanyang City continued to be quiet for a while, and then they were broken by a cacophony of noise, ushering in a flurry of soldiers and horses. There was the sound of porcelain bowls shattering into 18 pieces on the ground, the sound of windows being roughly slammed shut, the sound of sobbing shouts, the confused and childish questions of a child, the sound of parents scolding and beating, the sound of horses galloping into the distance, and even the faint rumble of the heavy city gate closing could be heard in the distance. In just a few moments, the pedestrians and peddlers on the streets of Xuanyang City had all disappeared. The long street became empty, leaving only the waste paper used to wrap oil cakes floating on the street, as well as a few wisps of dust drifting over from the distant city gate. Xuanyang City seemed to instantly become an empty city. Not every empty city was a trap. Sometimes, an empty city meant that it was a dead city, or perhaps it would soon become a dead city. Chen Chongqing stood by the window, gazing at the quiet and deserted street, listening to the sounds of people gradually fading away, looking at those timidly peeping eyes through the cracks in the tightly closed doors. He was stunned speechless. He could not understand. He had only shouted that Su Li was here, so why had it caused such a large disturbance? Vaguely, he felt that he had done something wrong, or perhaps he had still underestimated this matter. In the deep spring of Xuanyang City, the wind passing through the streets and alleys should have been slightly warm, but at this moment, the furnaces on the side of the street had already been extinguished and there was no sign of human habitation, so this wind became a little chilly. Chen Chongqing subconsciously closed the window again and turned his head to look. He saw Su Li sitting on a chair, somewhat helplessly and somewhat tauntingly asking, "Scared?" Chen Chongqing's voice was a bit nervous. "It's just a gamble." At some point, Su Li's left hand had grasped the yellow paper umbrella. His right hand lightly tapped on the armrest of the chair. Looking into his eyes, he said, "Then I can tell you right now, you have lost the bet. Su Li was here." These 4 words spread with unimaginable speed throughout Xuanyang City. Not even the fastest red falcons or red geese of the great Zhou army were able to intercept this news. Xuanyang City was deathly still, but behind this deathly silence was true chaos. The bowls and plates of countless ordinary people had suffered a calamity, countless people had sprained their feet. The place with the most tense atmosphere was naturally the inn that Su Li and Chen Chongqing were in. At the same time, this inn was also the source of this chaos. The guests eating had fled as fast as they could, and many of the guests staying in the inn had disappeared along with the stream of people without even bothering to take their luggage. Even the owner of the inn and the waiters had already stealthily slipped away. At this moment, the inn was completely silent. There were overturned tables and chairs everywhere. It was a scene of complete disorder. Only at the counter against the wall stood an accountant. That accountant's eyebrows were hung upside down, making him seem rather wretched. The long gown he wore had been washed extremely clean, but it made him seem even more wretched. Perhaps it was because he was too wretched, but he was reluctant to part with this job. Even now, he had not left the inn. He still stood behind the counter, fiddling with the abacus and calculating the account. The news had already spread, so people naturally began to arrive one after another. What made Chen Chongqing somewhat happy was that the first to arrive were people from the orthodoxy. The bishop of Xuanyang City was the northernmost bishop of the orthodoxy in the continent. He had an extremely high status and an extremely heavy authority. The current bishop of Xuanyang City was called Hua Jiefu, and he was the Pope's trusted aide. As a result, his status in Xuanyang City, and even in the entire Tianliang County, was extremely revered. Whether it was the Lord of Xuanyang City or that princely estate, he very rarely had to personally pay a visit. However, today he had to personally come to this inn, and the attitude he displayed made the entire Xuanyang City somewhat uncomfortable. Hua Jiefu did not allow the several dozen accompanying priests to enter the inn. He stood in front of the stone steps, tidied up his red clothes, and then walked in alone. He appeared very low-key, even faintly humble. If Suli were not heavily injured and did not have long to live, this respect would naturally have been given to him. However, right now this respect was given to Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng was currently the principal of the Orthodox Academy. Using Archbishop Melisha's words, within the Orthodoxy, besides the Pope, he did not need to bow to anyone. On the contrary, others should bow to him. It was just that a cardinal of noble status respectfully bowing to him still made him feel very uncomfortable, and he subconsciously leaned his body to the side. Hua Jiefu straightened his body, not even glancing at the tightly shut door to his side. He said to Chen Chongsheng, "We just received the news that Sir was still alive, but we were unable to confirm it. Seeing Sir today is truly a joyous matter. I believe that once this news reaches the capital, His Holiness will also be very happy. Countless people in the capital will raise their heads in anticipation of Sir's return." He did not finish speaking, but his words were already straightforward enough. The Archbishop got straight to the point and invited Chen Chongsheng to leave Xuanyang City. If Chen Chongsheng agreed, the Church of Xuanyang City would undoubtedly dispatch a powerful escort, and even Hua Jiefu would personally escort him. Chen Chongsheng gazed at the tightly shut door. After a moment of silence he said, "You know, right now I am in a bit of trouble. I admit that this gentleman is truly an enormous trouble, perhaps even the greatest trouble in the last several hundred years." Hua Jiefu glanced at the door and said, "But this is not Sir's trouble, nor is it the Orthodoxy's trouble. If Sir insists on staying in this inn, this trouble will only get bigger and bigger, until it gets so big that even I have no way of resolving it." Chen Chongsheng asked, "Then, when will this trouble appear?" Hua Jiefu replied, "Very soon. Moreover, news has come from the capital that someone from Scholatry Manor might have come to the north. For the time being, we cannot confirm his identity, but we can confirm that he is a great trouble." Chen Chongsheng fell silent for a while, then asked, "Can I not bring Sir Su with me to the capital?" Hua Jiefu did not need to think. He straightforwardly said, "The Li Palace has not said anything." Chen Chongsheng fell silent once more, understanding what he meant. From the time he had encountered those two assassins in Shui, he until now, a period of time had already passed. The Li Palace had assuredly known about him and Su Li, but they had only requested the subordinate church to escort Chen Chongsheng back to the capital. They had not mentioned a single word about Su Li. This already represented the Li Palace's stance. "I might have to wait in the inn for a while longer. We will definitely protect Sir's safety, but we cannot protect this Mister just because Sir wants to protect this Mister in the room. Sir should understand that this is not a fair matter." "Yes." Chen Chongsheng looked at Hua Jiefu and said, "So you can pretend that you don't know that I am in Xuanyang City." Hua Jiefu replied, "But Sir is in Xuanyang City, and how long does Sir want to stay? In the end, every person's troubles have to be resolved by themselves, not to mention that Mr. himself is a problem." Chen Chongsheng thought it over, then said, "I want to wait for someone from the Mountly Sword sect to come, or someone he trusts who has the ability to protect him." Hua Jiefu sighed. "Everyone knows that Su Li has never trusted anyone, he has no friends, not a single one. If Sir wants to wait for such a person to appear, how long will you wait?" Perhaps, but I always feel that there should be someone willing to help him. Saying this, Chen Chongqing turned around and walked back into the room. Hua Jiafu suddenly said from behind him, "Sir probably does not know, something has happened outside the garden of Zhou. Sir really needs to return to the capital as quickly as possible to resolve it." Chen Chongqing stopped and asked, "What is it?" Hua Jiafu replied, "Liang Xiaoxiao is dead." Chen Chongqing had not expected to hear this sort of news. After staring blankly for a while, he asked, "He was a spy of the demons. Who killed him?" Hua Jiefu's expression was rather complicated. "He said that he was killed by Sir." Chen Chongqing was very shocked. "He said that? I killed him?" "Yes." Although he did not say anything before he died, everyone knew what he meant. Hua Jiefu looked into his eyes and said, "He died under the last move of the Mountly sword style. In the Garden of Zhou, only Qi Jian and Sir know this sword style." Chen Chongqing was stunned, unable to understand what was going on. Hua Jiafu finally said, "Liang Xiaoxiao said that Sir and Zhixiu were spies of the demons. Zhixiu has already been sent to Zhou prison." Hearing this, Chen Chongqing fell silent for a very long time. He knew that he had to return to the capital as quickly as possible, but how could he leave now? He gazed at the tightly shut door and felt that it was very troublesome. The spring festival has not yet passed, so the holiday has ended. I wish everyone a happy new year. I have just begun to resume my work, so I need to slowly find my state. The number of updates won't be too many. Last month, I am still quite a ways off from the promised 80,000 characters. This month, I will make up for it. The new year will bring a new atmosphere. Although I can't do it, I still need to work harder. I once again wish everyone a happy new year. Chapter 385. Chen Chongqing pushed open the door and walked up to the chair. He recounted to Su Li everything he had just heard, leaving nothing out. Su Li lightly tapped the armrest of the chair. After a moment of silence, he smiled. "The human world is full of troubles. What we need to do is resolve these troubles. Your troubles are actually not too troublesome. Although Liang Xiaoxiao's move was truly very beautiful, as long as you return to the capital, it can be resolved. If I can return to Mountly, it will obviously be even easier to resolve." Chen Chongqing understood his meaning. If Liang Xiaoxiao's death was because he wanted to use his life to do something, then this trouble was truly extremely difficult to resolve. However, he was still a popular figure of the orthodoxy. As long as the Pope still trusted him, the problem was not too big. As for the Mountly sword sect, as long as Su Li could return to Mountly alive, who would dare to question a word he casually said? Su Li's words seemed simple, but they were actually not simple at all. He had combined two troubles into one, resolving Chen Chongqing's greatest problem. Chen Chongqing did not need to make another choice. He only needed to maintain his original way of thinking. Afterwards, many troubles will appear in Xuanyang City. I seem to have underestimated the severity of this matter. The orthodoxy is not willing to appear, so I have no way of resolving these troubles. Sir is right, I seem to have lost my gamble. Chen Chongqing walked up to the table and took a sip of tea, moistening his somewhat parched throat. Su Li's eyebrows rose even higher and his smile flourished even more. "Of course you will lose your gamble, but your shout still has its benefit. At the very least, you've resolved my greatest trouble." Chen Chongqing put down the teacup, somewhat confused. He thought to himself, "Just what did I do? You've exposed my whereabouts, and the entire continent is watching Xuanyang City. In the end, old Yin still wants some face, so he can't let the disciples and grand disciples of the orthodoxy kill me in broad daylight." Su Li's smile faded and he calmly said, "If it weren't like this, then that cardinal outside the door would definitely be thinking about how to kill me, so at the very least, you've resolved the great trouble of the Li Palace." Chen Chongqing thought it over and realized that this was indeed the case. It was just that the orthodoxy's great problem had been resolved, but that did not mean that he had the ability to resolve the following problems. Hua Jiafu's previous attitude had been extremely clear. The orthodoxy truly would not do anything to Su Li, but it would also absolutely not help Su Li. At most, it would be a stance of not helping either side. While he was thinking about these things, a loud noise suddenly came from the silent street outside the inn. He walked to the window and opened it. He saw a cloud of dust behind the houses across the street. The walls and houses of the houses were collapsing. It was as if a huge monster was walking in his direction, or as if an earthquake was spreading. The priests outside the inn exclaimed, "The prince's mansion moved the carriage." Upon hearing this, Chen Chongqing was slightly startled. He looked at the approaching smoke and dust on the opposite side of the street and felt the tremors of the ground. He thought to himself, what does this mean? Who is heading towards the inn? He didn't have time to think further. He jumped out of the window and landed on the stone steps in front of the inn. At this time, Hua Jiafu also walked out of the inn and stood beside him. His expression was extremely grim and he seemed abnormally solemn. Who came? Chen Chongqing asked. The Liang household's imperial carriage. Hua Jiafu looked at the smoke and dust on the opposite side of the street and slightly creased his brow. This imperial carriage has not left the prince's mansion for almost 100 years. I didn't think that it would move today. It was still that Liang character. It really was that Liang character. Chen Chongqing and Su Li had journeyed south and learned of the distribution of many powers in the cultivation world. He was even more vigilant towards the surname of Liang, because Liang Xiaoxiao was surnamed Liang and Liang Hongzhuang was also surnamed Liang. The surname Liang was once the surname of the country. The Liang clan was the imperial clan of the previous dynasty of the Central Plains, and they once had an incomparably close relationship through marriage with the current imperial clan of the Great Zhou, the Chen clan. 1,000 years ago, the Chen clan replaced the Liang clan, but they still treated the Liang clan with the utmost respect. Perhaps it was because of their past relationship through marriage, or perhaps it was because they were ashamed. In short, they gave them all kinds of special treatment. After the founding of the Great Zhou dynasty, the Liang clan left the capital and returned to Tianliang County, where they were conferred the title of prince. However, they were still once monarchs, so how could they possibly be willing to accept such a fate? They still yearned to recover their former glory, but time was always battered by the wind and rain. Besides the fact that their bloodline was still noble, and they were still revered by the people of the world, they had long since lost the ability to change the heavens and the earth. It was probably because of this that they were able to exist in the north of the continent until now. However, the surname that had once ruled over the entire continent naturally possessed an extraordinary bloodline. Countless experts had appeared in the Liang clan over the past 1,000 years, but in this generation, the most famous was the young prince of the Liang household, Liang Wangsun. Just as Hua Jiafu had said, the imperial carriage of the Liang household had not been moved for many years. Today, the imperial carriage had left the prince's mansion, breaking through the walls and trampling over the courtyards towards the inn. Such a large disturbance meant that something major had occurred. The only person in the world that had the right to sit in the imperial carriage was naturally Liang Wangsun. Before the expert from Scholatry Manor that had come to the north to travel appeared, this prince was probably the greatest problem that Su Li and Chen Chongqing had to deal with. Liang Wangsun was not that prince's original name. That young prince was called Liang Zhen, but no one in Xuanyang City dared to use this name to call him. Gradually, the entire continent began to call him Liang Wangsun. Third on the proclamation of liberation, Liang Wangsun, straight to the point. This name originated from Liang Wangsun's temperament. He possessed the most noble bloodline and the most formidable cultivation talent. When this young prince did things, he was always very direct, very straightforward, or perhaps very tyrannical. The imperial carriage of the Liang household was truly too large. It was simply impossible for it to reach the long street that the inn was located on. As a result, the attendants of the prince's mansion began to tear down the building, tearing it down from the north of Xuanyang City all the way here. It was truly tyrannical to the extreme. With a massive boom, the building on the street across from the inn collapsed, sending up a cloud of dust. An extremely luxurious imperial carriage slowly appeared in the midst of the cloud of dust. This imperial carriage was about 10 zhang wide and also 10 zhang long. Its surface was paved with the extremely valuable black nightmare stone. Some master had personally carved several hundred layers of flower petals, making it seem like a lotus seat. On both sides of the lotus seat were several dozen obedient children and young girls. On such a large lotus seat sat only one person. This person was extremely handsome. His black hair was tied up extremely tightly. His clothes seemed simple, but they were actually extremely exquisite. His body exuded a noble aura, and his sitting posture was extremely straight. In the center of the lotus seat, his right hand rested on his knee and his left hand gripped a pestle. His body was slightly leaning forward like a statue. His eyes were also like a statue, lacking much life, only a cold aura. This person was Liang Wangsun. He directly opened a great gate in the myriad buildings of Xuanyang City. He wanted to see the mountain, and then push down the mountain. Yesterday's chapter's title is not good to use, so it's changed to today's. In March, I will definitely work hard, but I might have to wait until the 8th to work hard. Chapter 386. The mountain that Liang Wangsun wanted to see, to push down, was naturally Mount Li. The entire continent knew that Su Li was Mount Li. In the past, this mountain was too high to climb. Even experts like Wang Po, Xiao Zhang, and Liang Wangsun, who were high up on the proclamation of liberation, were unable to directly challenge it. But now, Su Li was heavily injured, and this mountain was already tottering on the verge of collapse. Liang Wangsun believed that he had the qualifications and ability to destroy this mountain, so after receiving the news, he boarded the carriage and left the estate without hesitation, arriving in front of this inn. But right now there was still a youth standing in front of this mountain. If he wanted to push down this mountain, he first had to pass through this youth. "You are Chen Chongxing?" Liang Wangsun calmly asked the youth in front of the stone steps of the inn. Chen Chongxing did not reply, because he was currently very nervous. Other than the glance he had given Wang Po at the entrance of the Mausoleum of Books, this was his first time seeing someone on the proclamation of liberation. These people were the true core strength of the human world. The era of blooming wildflowers had begun with the appearance of names like Liang Wangsun. Of course, after coming to the capital from Shiliang village, he had already seen many truly powerful figures, but those powerful figures were too high up. Whether it was the Pope or Su Li, even if they could be considered close, he still could not feel that they were real. But this young prince on the Black Lotus carriage was different, because with Chen Chongxing's current cultivation and reputation, he had long since surpassed the boundaries of the proclamation of Azure Sky and entered the proclamation of Golden Distinction. In other words, he was already very close to the proclamation of liberation. Only by getting close could one truly feel the pressure or perhaps the disparity. Liang Wangsun's brows slightly rose. Chen Chongxing's silence somewhat surprised him, but for some reason, he did not get angry. Instead, he calmly asked once more, "You are Chen Chongxing?" This time, Chen Chongxing truly came to his senses and realized that the other party was asking him. His opponent had come to kill Su Li, but the person who dared to kill Su Li had first placed his attention on him. If it were any other youth, perhaps they would have felt a little proud and pleased, but he did not, because he did not have the self-awareness of being famous. In reality, no matter if it was the Ivy Festival, the Grand Examination, viewing the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books, or his subsequent appointment as principal of the Orthodox Academy, all of these events had already made him the most famous person on the continent. Even a person like Liang Wangsun had to first say a few words to him, even if they were just words of courtesy. The street in front of the tavern was quiet and the dust gradually settled. Other than the priests that were scattered all around, a lot of figures could be faintly seen. Those people were probably the king's mansion's warriors that were ready to attack the tavern at any time, but they didn't move at the moment because everyone was waiting for Chen Chongqing's reply. The young Taoist of Xining village already had the qualifications to interact with someone like Liang Wangsun on equal footing. But contrary to everyone's expectations, Chen Chongqing didn't say anything. He directly turned around and walked into the inn, closed the door, then turned into a wisp of smoke and ran to the second floor. Liang Wangsun sat upright and still in the middle of the Black Lotus. His eyebrows rose even higher, a faint smile on his face. Pushing open the tightly shut door, Chen Chongqing arrived in front of Su Li's chair and said, "Let's run." Su Li opened his eyes and glanced at him. "I've already placed my bet. It's too late to concede." Chen Chongqing lowered his head and said nothing, his chest rising and falling. He wanted to take Su Li and escape, which naturally meant that he had already overturned his original plan. He had conceded because the difference in strength was here, so he had no choice but to concede. Because with just a glance, he knew that he had absolutely no chance of defeating Liang Wangsun. Not even a hair thinner than a strand of hair. Outside the tavern, the street was as quiet as before. Liang Wangsun looked down at the Archbishop of Xuanyang City and asked, "Does the orthodoxy care about this matter?" Hua Jiefu's face was also expressionless. "I don't care about the life and death of unrelated people, but we have to care about Principal Chen's safety." Previously, Chen Chongqing had said to the Archbishop that he could pretend that he didn't know that he had come to Xuanyang City, but the entire city knew that he was here, so how could the people of the Orthodoxy not care about him? "I don't understand why this young Principal Chen wants to care about this matter, but I don't care." Liang Wangsun took out a snow-white handkerchief from his sleeve and lightly wiped at the dust on his clothes. "Since the carriage of the princely estate has been moved, there must be a conclusion to this matter." Hua Jiefu looked at him with a grave expression and said, "His Holiness the Pope is waiting for Principal Chen's return in the capital." Liang Wangsun's movements slightly paused. After a moment of silence he said, "Then all of you send him back. If he's not willing to leave, I might have to kill him as well." Hua Jiefu shook his head. "If that happens, the Liang household will have no descendants." The Archbishop's words were very plain, without the slightest hint of threat. This was because this was an objective fact. If Chen Chongqing died in Xuanyang City, anyone could imagine how the orthodoxy would react. But it was only because it was plain that it was unyielding. Liang Wangsun fell silent once more. He threw the slightly ashen handkerchief under the carriage and said with some interest, "Have no descendants? After that matter 10-odd years ago, do you think there's any meaning in the existence of my Liang household? Today, I killed Su Li in broad daylight. Am I not afraid that Mount Li will kill my entire family? So this is useless to me." Hua Jiefu felt the spring wind suddenly turn cold. 10-odd years ago, the saints had forcefully covered up the truth of the most terrifying massacre after the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy, so he was not very clear on all the details of that major event. However, he was keenly aware of the bitter price the Liang household had paid. He looked at the young prince on the carriage and advised, "There's no need to be so resolute." The Black Lotus carriage was very large. Liang Wangsun sitting in it seemed like he was sitting on an upper floor, perfectly level with the second floor of the inn. He looked at the tightly shut window on the second floor of the inn and sighed, "Who asked those 4 words to be so resolute?" Xuanyang City had become a silent city of death, a massacre at hand. All of this was because Chen Chongqing had pushed open the window and shouted those 4 words into the bright and beautiful spring light. Su Li was here. These 4 words had forced Chen Chongqing and Su Li into a land of death. In truth, it had also forced those people that wanted to kill Su Li into a desperate situation. The orthodoxy could no longer move against Su Li. The great Zhou army could no longer move against him. Those that wanted to kill Su Li in secret, like Liang Wangsun, could only do it openly. There were many things in the world that could only be done and not said, much less seen by others, or else it would be hard to explain. Whether it was to the people of the South or to the books of history. Like killing Su Li. This could only be a bloody affair hidden in the shadows of history, just like the alliance of fallen Willow Plains, just like the coup of the 100 Herb Garden, just like the truth behind the disappearance of the Zhou dynasty *****. But Chen Chongqing had only used 4 words to turn this matter into a grand occasion known by the entire world. The banquet has already begun, so how can I leave early? In a gloomy room of the inn, Su Li sat on a chair. He looked at the lowered head of the youth in front of him and smiled. I taught you how to march and arrange armies, taught you how to wield the intellectual sword as you wish. You learned very well, even exceeding my highest expectations of you. You were actually able to transform all the myriad changes into that shout just now. Now I'm really rather curious, just how long can you protect me? It is still the end of the year. There are countless dinners and gatherings. It really can't be helped. I've made everyone wait for so long. I'm sorry. Chapter 387. By shouting out Su Li's whereabouts, he had forced all the people and matters hidden in the darkness into the light of day. Chen Chongqing had not done this deliberately, but had acted according to his heart. What he cared about the most was following his heart. But before doing this, he had naturally carefully considered the consequences and felt that the benefits would outweigh the disadvantages, just as Liang Wangsun had sighed ruefully. This was a sort of strategy and also a sort of calculation. On his journey south, the principles that Su Li had taught him, like strategies and sword styles, had all been used by him. From another perspective, when he shouted those 4 words to the bright and beautiful spring sunshine of Xuanyang City, it was like stabbing an intellectual sword into the pitch-black night, finally tearing open a hole and finding some light. But the moment he saw Liang Wangsun with his own eyes, he suddenly realized that there was a problem with his calculations. The problem here was not that he could not defeat and had to flee, but that he believed that Liang Wangsun should not have appeared in the first place. Liang Wangsun had disregarded the inheritance of the Wang estate and the surging will of the people. He had actually come to kill Su Li in broad daylight. Just why? Why? Chen Chongqing asked Su Li. Su Li replied, because they are all surnamed Liang. Liang Xiaoxiao, Liang Hongzhuang, Liang Hongsun. These 3 people who had shown that they most wanted Su Li dead were all surnamed Liang. They were all of Prince Liang's bloodline? And what unresolvable grudge did Su Li and the Liang household have? Once an emperor, who would be willing to remain a prince forever? Su Li looked out the window at the faintly discernible black lotus carriage and said, what the successive masters of the Liang household wanted to do the most was to return to the capital and sit on the imperial throne once more. It was just that they never had the chance. Only 10-odd years ago, with that internal strife in the capital, did they finally see a possibility. Chen Chongqing had heard Su Li speak of that matter and asked in confusion, back then, wasn't the longevity sect the one that wanted to rise up? Su Li replied, to scheme for the world, one must think deeply. Several hundred years ago, the Liang household began to infiltrate the longevity sect. 10-odd years ago, the longevity sect incited conflict between the North and the South. It was precisely their good method. Chen Chongqing was confused. Back then, the elders of the longevity sect had all been killed by Su Li's sword, and the scheme that the Liang household had hidden for several hundred years had been crushed. They truly did hate them, but why did they hate Su Li to the bone? Su Li said, "One of those elders has the surname Liang, so he should be Liang Xiaoxiao's ancestor. As for why Liang Wangsun and Liang Hongzhuang hate me so much, perhaps it's because after I killed people in the longevity sect, I took a trip to Xuanyang City and killed all those old fellows in the Liang household." Chen Chongqing was silent and speechless. He thought to himself, this is the same as killing an entire family. With such a deep hatred, it's no wonder that the youths of King Liang's bloodline hate Su Li so much that Liang Xiaoxiao didn't even hesitate to collude with the demons. Outside the window, Liang Wangsun and the bishop of Xuanyang City could faintly be heard conversing. Chen Chongqing listened silently for a while and suddenly asked, "Senior, do we really need to kill so many people?" A mocking expression appeared on Su Li's face. "Are you preparing to preach again?" Chen Chongqing shook his head and said, "I just feel that this matter shouldn't have caused so much bloodshed." Su Li did not directly answer. He said, "Back then, the longevity sect and the Liang household wanted to conquer the south and the north. At that time, the capital was in utter chaos, and the imperial court and the orthodoxy were still divided and in confrontation. The only problem that the Southerners could not resolve was also the greatest problem, the existence of Tianhai. In the end, they found a method to resolve this problem." "What method?" "They wanted me to go to the capital and kill Tianhai. Even if I couldn't kill Tianhai, I believed that Tianhai would still be heavily injured." "Senior, did you go?" The moment Chen Chongqing asked this question, he knew that it was nonsense. Of course, Su Li did not go to the capital to kill the Tianhai Divine Empress, or else history would not have turned out this way. Just as expected, Su Li looked at him like he was an idiot and said, "Do I look like I'm sick?" Chen Chongqing thought to himself, those Southerners really are sick, to actually think of such an impossible idea. He asked, "How did they persuade Senior back then?" "They captured my wife and imprisoned her in the cold pool of the longevity sect. Then, they used the righteous cause to persuade me." When Su Li said these words, there was no other expression on his face, but even after 10 odd years, Chen Chongqing seemed to still be able to sense his anger. "No one likes to kill people, and I don't like it either." Su Li finally said, "If too much blood flows, it's very troublesome to clean the sword, let alone the clothes, so I don't like to bleed either. But sometimes people must be killed and blood must flow." Chen Chongqing understood. This story of the past that he had once heard had been completely filled in today. Su Li wanted to use this matter to tell him a simple principle, and at the same time, he did not want to listen to his advice. To exist in the world, to live freely, to protect the people one loved from harm, one had to be strong enough, and make the entire world acknowledge one's strength, fear one's strength. How could one prove it? How could one make the world acknowledge this point? One had to dare to kill, to dare to make the entire world bleed. Su Li had done just this. He killed all of the longevity sect's elders, almost wiped out King Liang's household, and turned the continent into a river of blood. Even though he wasn't able to save his wife's life, no one dared to threaten him or use him in the next dozen or so years. No one dared to threaten his daughter either. Understanding did not mean that he could accept it, but Chen Chongqing could not say anything more to Su Li, so he could only say it to someone else. He walked to the window, opened it, and gazed at Liang Wangsun in the Black Lotus imperial carriage. He simply said, "I want to protect him." Liang Wangsuan's handsome and noble face revealed a mysterious smile. "Many people believe that you died in the Garden of Zhou, but I didn't think that you would die in Xuanyang City." Chen Chongqing's words were very simple, and Liang Wangsuan's response was also very simple. Since he had killed Su Li under the watchful eyes of countless people, it meant that he no longer cared about the threats of anyone, not even the orthodoxy. Back then, he did not kill you, he did not kill Liang Hongzhuang, and he also did not kill Liang Xiaoxiao. Chen Chongqing continued. He left the Liang household a path of retreat, so perhaps the Liang household can also leave him a path of retreat. But back then, very few people were able to survive, and do you really think that was a path of retreat? No, what the Liang household lost was the hope of countless people over the past several hundred years. However, I really can leave him a path of retreat. Liang Wangsun callously said, "You let me chop off his 4 limbs, cripple his meridians, and I'll let him live." Chen Chongqing fell silent for a while, then said, "That's not fair." Liang Wangsun replied, "Blood for blood, death for death, nothing is more fair than that." Chen Chongqing said, "Senior went to the snowy plains for the sake of the humans and was heavily injured by the demon's encirclement. Otherwise, none of you would have been able to kill him, so he should not have died at the hands of humans, at least not this time. At the very least, he should not have died like this, no matter how many people he once killed, even if he really wasn't a good person." Hearing these words, the priests around the inn and the deathsworn of the Liang household all felt their moods change. Liang Wangsun looked at Chen Chongqing at the window and calmly said, "Perhaps what you say is reasonable. For a legend of a generation to die like this, I, who killed him, will probably only leave behind the name of a thief in the annals of history, but I don't care, and the world won't care, because this is the only chance to kill him, and everyone in the world wants him dead." Chen Chongqing asked, "Even if this is tantamount to conspiring with the demons? This is a shameless murder. Let alone conspiring with the demons, even if it's a deal with the devil, so what?" As Liang Wangsun finished speaking, the buildings around the inn began to collapse one after another, the figures of countless cultivators appearing. Although the city gate of Xuanyang City was already closed, how could it stop these people that wanted to kill Su Li? A fiery ray of light suddenly flashed in the sky. As the temperature rose and a fierce gale blew, a red cloud Qilin landed on one end of the street. Shui He sat on it, his armor still stained with the blood from that day. Soon after, Liang Hongzhuang, dressed in dancing clothes, appeared on the other end of the street. His charming face was already covered in dust, and the sword wounds on his body were still clearly visible. It was a mystery how he had managed to endure and rush back. Seeing Liang Hongzhuang appear, Hua Jiafu slightly creased his brow. On that day, it was precisely this bishop of Xuanyang City that had secretly informed Liang Hongzhuang of Su Li's whereabouts. "You see, even the orthodoxy actually wants him dead." Liang Wangsun looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "And how can you oppose the entire human world?" Chen Chongqing looked at those figures around the inn and in the alleys. He did not know who these people were, what sort of reputation they had in the northern lands of the continent, or what sect they belonged to. He could only sense how terrifying these people were from their qi. These were all people that had come to kill Su Li. Shui He was a divine general of the Great Zhou, so he probably would not act. Liang Hongzhuang probably already did not have the strength to act. But these people would act. Not to mention that there was still that famous assassin, Lu Qing, who had always been hiding in the shadows. In today's battle, besides Liang Wangsun, the most terrifying person was probably this person. Su Li was heavily injured. He had sent an invitation to the entire continent for a banquet. The guests that had come to participate in this banquet had already arrived. They used their swords as chopsticks, prepared to drink a cup of fine wine made from blood and enjoy a feast of human flesh. Chen Chongqing did not know if there would still be guests coming to this banquet, so he wanted to try flipping over the table. He stood by the window, looking at Liang Wangsun in the Black Lotus carriage. His expression did not change. He slowly circulated his true qi and his spiritual sense fell into the sheath of his sword. He connected with the spiritual soul of the black dragon and awakened those swords that had slumbered for many days. Countless swords. He began to calculate, began to prepare to ignite his true essence, began to prepare for the simultaneous attack of 10,000 swords. The intellectual sword, the blazing sword, These were the swords that Su Li had taught him. The 10,000 swords were his swords. He wanted to try and see if he could use his advancement in the path of the sword to make up for the consumption of the 10,000 swords' sword intent, thus recreating that scene in front of the mausoleum of Zhou, and then directly killing Liang Wangsun in one blow. Chen Chongqing was a young genius at the upper level of ethereal opening, while Liang Wangsun was a true expert on the proclamation of liberation. No matter how one looked at it, even Chen Chongqing himself, the difference in strength between them was like a city. But he still wanted to try and see if he could kill his opponent. Because the current situation was predetermined. He had to kill Liang Wangsun so that Su Li could live. Perhaps this was the newest principle that he had learned from Su Li. Finally, over 3,000. This plot would begin to speed up tomorrow. The reason why it had been written slowly these past 2 days was firstly because he was lacking a breath, and secondly, it truly needed to be slowed down so that Chen Chongqing could walk a little more solidly. For this principle of killing, everyone can go back and look at the chapter where Chen Chongqing almost became an idiot. Chapter 388. Liang Wangsun was the first guest of this banquet. With his identity, strength, and status in the Jianghu, the court, and the world of cultivation, he absolutely had the right to be the guest of honor. Thus, Chen Chongqing wanted to kill him. Even if he knew that he was far from being a match, he still wanted to kill him. Only this way could he intimidate the entirety of Xuanyang City. Coupled with his status in the orthodoxy, only this way could he make people not dare to continue moving against Su Li. This was Chen Chongqing's arrangement. Only by killing could one save, and only by being unreasonable could one be reasonable. The long street outside the inn was quiet. The bright and beautiful light of spring shone upon the dust that had just settled and the surface of the street. With the sound of something breaking, Chen Chongqing smashed through the window, bringing with him shattered stone and wood shavings. In the blink of an eye, he was on the street. The carriage of the Liang household was 2 stories high. In front of the inn, he broke through the window and arrived in the middle of the carriage. His feet had not landed on the carriage, but his dagger had already left its sheath and pierced towards the space between Liang Wangsun's eyebrows. This strike was silent, without any power to speak of, nor could one sense any majestic ripples of true essence. It was like it had added an unremarkable brilliance to the bright and beautiful light of spring, yet it had shocked many people. Even Liang Wangsun's expression had turned solemn. The sword intent of Chen Chongqing's strike was extremely refined and powerful. It seemed to have already surpassed the existence of sword energy. The people on the street who saw this strike, whether they were the cultivators who dared to kill Su Li, the priests of the Orthodox Church of Xuanyang City, the death-sworn of the Liang household, or those ordinary servants and maids who did not understand cultivation or the path of the sword, all felt their eyes become somewhat sore. That sore feeling came from Chen Chongqing's sword intent, an incomparably sharp sword intent that also contained an innate pressure. His dagger was currently the new generation of the Dragoncry sword. This strike of his was like a dragon emerging from the sea, its light illuminating the surroundings. It seemed unremarkable, but it was actually extremely like a sun, so piercing that everyone had to squint their eyes. Everyone was shocked. Only now did they realize that Chen Chongqing's cultivation of the path of the sword had already reached such a level. Only Shui He and Liang Hongzhuang, who had fought against Chen Chongqing, were mentally prepared and didn't have any reaction. Although Chen Chongqing was already very famous and was viewed by many as one of the most talented youths of the younger generation of cultivators beneath Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong, in the end, not many people had personally witnessed his cultivation level, especially in the north of Xuanyang City. The cultivators here only knew that he was unordinary, but they didn't expect that at such a young age, he had already cultivated to the peak of ethereal opening. What was even more frightening was that his attainments in the path of the sword were so profound. In this very short period of time, Many people, including Bishop Hua Jiefu of Xuanyang City, could not help but have a thought that would normally be impossible. Could it be that Chen Chongqing's sword really could threaten Liang Wangsun? Sitting within the carriage and facing the edge of the sword, Liang Wangsun was able to perceive Chen Chongqing's sword manifestation more vividly than anyone else on the street. Yet, what was puzzling was that Chen Chongqing didn't move at all. He quietly looked at Chen Chongqing's sword, his eyes calm and indifferent, giving off a noble and inviolable feeling. The Vajra pestle in his right hand suddenly shone brightly, instantly swallowing up the light on Chen Chongqing's sword. Was this an almost perfect star domain? Just as Chen Chongqing was thinking this, he suddenly felt that something was wrong, because his sword had very easily pierced through that light. Man and sword became one. When the dagger pierced through that light, he also entered that light. His 2 feet finally landed on the Liang household's carriage, stepping on solid ground. But his sword could not pierce through the space between Liang Wangsuan's eyebrows, but stopped right in front of it. At some point, Liang Wangsuan's left hand, which had been hanging by his side, had been raised, blocking Chen Chongqing's dagger. He had only used 2 fingers to clamp down on this dagger. Those 2 fingers seemed rather delicate and soft, even somewhat like a woman's, but in reality they were like 2 mountains. Even if Chen Chongqing's sword was a true dragon, it might still be caught between these 2 mountains, unable to advance. Before breaking through the window and unleashing his sword, Chen Chongqing had made the most deductions and calculations for this battle, and they were all focused on how to find the weakness or flaw in Liang Wangsuan's star domain. He had not expected at all that Liang Wangsun had not even used his star domain, and had only used 2 fingers to stop his sword. Was this the confidence and dignity of an expert of the proclamation of liberation? Looking at Liang Wangsuan's dignified eyes, Chen Chongqing suddenly felt his body grow somewhat cold. This person's strength and cultivation were too deep and unfathomable, far more powerful than he was. But the coldness in his body did not originate from this difference in strength, because he was still hiding something. His true sword had not yet pierced out, but rather came from some sort of vague feeling. Liang Wangsun did not use his star domain. It had nothing to do with confidence, nothing to do with contempt, and it probably did not want to humiliate him, because that did not fit with his status and bearing, and it was also not a mistake that a true expert would make. Then what exactly did he want to do? Just as expected, in the next moment, right before Chen Chongqing had no time to use his true sword, Liang Wangsun moved. With a slight movement of his spiritual sense, stardust danced on the black lotus carriage, and a strand of qi separated the 2 worlds. Liang Wangsun had used his star domain. At this moment, Chen Chongqing was in front of him, so he had also entered his star domain, or perhaps it could be said that he was trapped in his star domain. To a star condensation expert, the most important use of a star domain was to protect oneself from any attack. What was Liang Wangsuan's intention in doing this? Chen Chongqing knew that his opponent's actions had a deeper meaning, but he could not understand it for a moment. However, his sword heart was not in disorder, his sword intent as steady as before. His right foot stepped forward, and the true essence in his body instantly began to fiercely blaze. Liang Wangsuan's eyes grew even brighter, even more solemn, and even more serious. It was very obvious that he had sensed the explosive increase in Chen Chongqing's true essence, and also sensed the possible danger. Liang Wangsun knew that in a moment, Chen Chongqing's true sword would arrive. At this moment, he did not know that this sword was at least several thousand swords. He only knew that in a similar moment, Su Li would die. It would all take a moment, but Chen Chongqing might not be able to injure Liang Wangsun, but Liang Wangsun was very sure that Su Li would die. As a result, Chen Chongqing soon understood that he would not have the chance to wait for this moment to end. Because at the beginning of this moment, a snowflake had drifted down onto the carriage of the Liang household. Countless snowflakes had fallen onto the streets around the inn. In the middle of spring, Xuanyang City had suddenly experienced a snowfall. Chen Chongqing looked into Liang Wangsuan's eyes and saw many emotions, but he did not see any killing intent. As a result, he understood that Liang Wangsun had never wanted to kill him from start to finish. Yes, even a person like Liang Wangsun would not want to kill the youth of the Orthodox Academy deeply trusted and even favored by the Pope and Archbishop Melisha, unless it was absolutely necessary. He had taken the risk to use his star domain and leave Chen Chongqing on the carriage because he did not want Chen Chongqing to act. This battle was not between the two of them. The true killer of Su Li was someone else. Who was that person? Just who was the last guest to arrive at this banquet? The spring scenery had already been submerged in the snowstorm. A person suddenly descended from the snowy sky. It was a freak, his face covered in a sheet of white paper. 2 holes had been dug into the paper, revealing 2 eyes. The rest of the paper was a nose and a mouth drawn with simple lines. The freak's eyes were emotionless, devoid of spirit and devoid of love, but they were so cold that it made one feel incomparably crazy. A string was tied to the freak's waist. The other end of the string was in the sky, tied to an incomparably massive paper kite. That paper kite incessantly sprinkled paper to the ground. There was no wind or snow. The snowflakes fluttering through Xuanyang City were actually all paper. The freak's cultivation was terrifyingly strong. Even though he was still several dozen zhang from the ground, his tyrannical and crazy qi had already reached the street. Those cultivators with slightly weaker cultivations closed their eyes to resist, while those ordinary people directly fainted. In the blink of an eye, the black tiles and old eaves of the inn were completely crushed into rubble. With a muffled sound, the entire roof of the inn collapsed, the walls shattered, revealing the scene inside. In the dust and flying snow, the crowd could faintly make out the broken beams and furniture on the ground. In the ruins there was a chair. A middle-aged man sat on the chair, his hand holding an old-fashioned yellow paper umbrella. The streets were suddenly deathly still. This was the first time many people had seen Su Li's true appearance. The person descending from the sky thrust a spear at Su Li's body. The spear suddenly struck, the paper snow suddenly scattered, the wind and thunder stirred. The people around the inn cried out in alarm. Xiao Zhang! Painted armor Xiao Zhang! A person had ridden a kite to Xuanyang City to kill someone. He had sprinkled paper snowflakes ahead of time to send off the person he wanted to kill, because he believed that since he had come, that person would inevitably die. Even if that person was Su Li. Besides that madman ranked second on the proclamation of liberation, who else could do such a crazy thing? To make such an arrogant entrance, who else but painted armor Xiao Zhang could do it? The moment the spear appeared, Xuanyang City moved. This was Xiao Zhang's arrogant spear. Even if Su Li was not injured and his cultivation was at its peak, he would probably still have to seriously deal with it. Now that he had not recovered from his heavy injuries, how could he receive this spear? At this moment, Chen Chongqing was trapped on the long street by Liang Wangsun. Who would block this spear for him? Not bad. Give it a like. Chapter 389. Amidst the rubble of the inn, Su Li sat on a chair with his eyes closed. He seemed to be asleep, but he was actually awake. His hand gripped the yellow paper umbrella, but he had no intention of unsheathing it. The metal spear descending from the sky was only several zhang away from him, and his black hair was already drifting in the wind. The peerless expert that had once been undefeatable was now finally forced into desperate straits. Who could save him? Su Li had no friends. He had also never trusted anyone, except the people of Mount Li. Yet Mount Li was too far away. In Xuanyang City there was only Chen Chongqing. The only person that could help him block this spear was Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing had to help him block this spear. Thus, something that exceeded everyone's expectations occurred. The street outside the inn suddenly became incomparably hot. The paper snow drifting down from the sky danced even faster, and some of the paper pieces that fell onto the carriage were even charred and rolled up. This heat came from Chen Chongqing's body. He was using a method that was almost violent to burn his true essence. This was the second sword that Su Li had taught him, the blazing sword. Sword intent violently rose, filling up the entire space on the carriage. This violent sword style contained the soaring sword energy of the burning heaven sword, the peerless secret of the golden crow sword, and in the instant that true essence was burned, it also contained the determination and boldness of the final move of the Mountly sword style, die for a noble cause. This sword had originally been specially created by Su Li for him to surpass cultivation levels and battle experts. Back in the tea house by the official road, Chen Chongqing's blazing sword had directly chopped the star condensation tyrant of the north, Lin Pingyuan, into a cripple. Even though Liang Wangsuan's strength was unfathomable, he was still somewhat moved by this sword. Liang Wangsun loosened his fingers and formed a sword seal, causing the Vajra pestle to howl. Chen Chongqing's blazing sword did not truly stab out. He turned his wrist and withdrew his sword, then stabbed out once more. This time, he did not stab at the space between Liang Wangsuan's eyebrows, but at the space in front of the carriage to the right. This sword seemed to be played down, but it was actually filled with profound meaning. The place where the tip of the sword pointed contained a great deal of knowledge. This was the first sword that Su Li had taught him, the intellectual sword. The intellectual sword required a vast amount of calculations, a talent for deduction, a brilliant sword heart, and very good luck. For a star condensation expert like Liang Wangsun, his star domain could be said to be perfect. Even if Chen Chongqing's strike came from inside out, it would still be extremely difficult to break through, so he was putting his life on the line. Perhaps it was because his luck was bad, or perhaps it was because his luck was too good. Whenever he risked his life, his luck was always good. With a soft sound, the dagger pierced a small hole in Liang Wangsuan's star domain. Chen Chongqing's figure suddenly disappeared. Releasing steam, he rolled up the paper and returned to the inn. This was the discerning step. The interior of the building was a mess. Su Li sat on a chair with his eyes closed, as if he was waiting for death. The iron spear pierced through the snowy sky and was about to stab his chest. Chen Chongqing appeared in front of Su Li. Everyone who saw him felt their eyes ache. This had nothing to do with the initial sword intent, but because his body was emitting a terrifying heat. No real flames could be seen on his body, but it gave people the feeling that he was burning. Facing this iron spear descending from the heavens, Chen Chongqing held his sword horizontally in front of him. The dagger did not brighten, nor did it reveal the might of a dragon. It seemed very ordinary, like stone, like sand. When stone and sand were mixed together, they could form an embankment. This iron spear that came from the snowy sky was incomparably terrifying and powerful, like an overflowing flood. As Chen Chongqing held his sword horizontally, a great embankment seemed to appear in front of the raging flood. This was the third sword that Su Li had taught him. This sword had a very stupid name. It was called the Stupid Sword. According to Su Li's words, this was a very stupid sword style, so only the stupidest of people could learn it. This was also a sword style of its most basic nature, because this sword could not be used to face an enemy, only to defend. The reason it was called the Stupid Sword was because there was no other way to learn this sword. It could only be practiced over and over again, practiced until the seas ran dry and the rocks crumbled, practiced until the stars changed and the stars moved, practiced until the heavens and the earth were unchanging, yet there was no way to confirm whether or not one had learned it. When Chen Chongqing heard these words, he had no intention of learning this sword. Only when Su Li said that this stupid sword could be called the strongest defensive sword style in the world did he change his mind. The sword left Mount Li, and Su Li's attainments in the path of the sword were unparalleled. He was experienced and knowledgeable, so his judgment was naturally not wrong. But when he formally began to learn the stupid sword, he regretted it. Because not even Su Li had succeeded in learning this sword. In all of Mount Li, in all of the continent, no one had succeeded in learning this sword. Even in the long river of history, no one had succeeded in learning this sword. In other words, this sword style only existed in books, existed in the imaginary path of the sword. It had never truly appeared. Su Li said that the reason he had not been able to learn this sword was because he was too talented. His sword heart was free and unrestrained, unwilling to be bound. However, Chen Chongqing really did have the possibility of learning this sword. Because, in certain aspects, Chen Chongqing really was very stupid. Chen Chongqing naturally would not believe his words, but he really did stupidly begin to learn this sword. He practiced day and night, and at a certain moment, he even felt that he really had learned this sword. But there was no way to confirm this because he had never tried it. Until now. That arrogant spear pierced through the snowy sky and descended. The myriad swords unleashing unison could not be used, because that freak riding the kite was clearly insane. In order to kill Su Li, he simply did not care if his body was pierced with thousands of holes. Chen Chongqing could only use this sword. Since he had to block the spear, he could only block it. He held his sword horizontally in front of him. As he watched the spear and the fluttering red tassel getting closer and closer, his mind was extremely nervous, his body incomparably stiff. But his sword heart was incomparably calm, and his expression even seemed somewhat lifeless. At this moment the youth really did seem rather stupid. The red tassel danced, tearing through the paper snow. The spear arrived in the room, its bright and arrogant tip clashing with the dim and steady blade. In just an instant, the tip of the spear clashed with the dagger several thousand times. The fluttering pieces of paper on the end shattered into powder, and the snowfall grew even more intense, even more real. There was a massive boom. Waves of qi surged out from the inn. The paper snow spread out, enveloping an area of several hundred zhang in circumference. In the silence, a harsh and ear-piercing sound arose. It was the sound of iron scraping against iron. The spear slowly moved back. Chen Chongqing still stood in front of Su Li. His face was pale, his body incessantly trembling, especially his two legs. It seemed like in the next moment he would collapse, but he did not. He did not even retreat a single step. He himself did not know this, because that spear was truly too powerful, too terrifying. In the final moment, he had even closed his eyes, and even now, he still had not opened them. The effects of the violent combustion of true essence were still present. The temperature of his body was extremely high, incomparably scalding. Occasionally, a piece of paper would fall on his body and be ignited, emitting wisps of white smoke. It seemed rather strange. The crowd looked at Chen Chongqing, who was emitting white smoke, and were shocked speechless. In an impossible situation, he had forcefully broken through Liang Wangsuan's star domain, returned to the inn, and forcefully blocked that spear that had pierced through the air. Just how had this youth done it? It must be known that no matter how much of a genius he was still only 16 years old. Today, he was not facing those opponents of the same age in the grand examination, but a true expert of the proclamation of liberation. Amazing to actually be able to block one of my spears. An emotionless voice resounded from within the building. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes, finally clearly seeing the freak that had arrived on a kite. This freak was rather thin and wore a shabby short garment, revealing half of his arms and calves. His face was covered by a piece of white paper. On the white paper was a drawing of a nose and a mouth, revealing only his two eyes. Chen Chongqing was indeed amazing, everyone present thought so. Because he could block this person's spear, because this person was painted armor Xiao Zhang. Starting from the Boiling Stone Summit 40 years ago, the cultivation world officially welcomed the era of blooming wildflowers. Countless geniuses poured out, but painted armor Xiao Zhang had always been the most dazzling name. He was equally famous as Wang Po of Tianliang, a true expert of the human world. And in the eyes of many, he was even more terrifying than Wang Po of Tianliang, because he was a madman. Many years ago, after the Boiling Stone Summit, Wang Po took first place, while Sun Mei, Liang Wangsun, and the others were placed behind him. Xiao Zhang was extremely unwilling, and in order to surpass Wang Po, he forcefully cultivated in some problematic technique. In the end, he suffered a cultivation defect and failed. Just when everyone believed that he would fall, who could have imagined that he would disperse all his cultivation and begin cultivating from the beginning? In just a few short years, he had once again entered the upper level of star condensation. Just how crazy and powerful was this will? Because of his cultivation deviation, Xiao Zhang wasn't able to participate in the second year's grand examination. At the same time, his face was heavily injured, almost to the point of disfigurement. It was also from that moment onwards that his face was covered with a piece of white paper, never to be removed. The common people called him Painted Armor Xiao Zhang, not only because the sect he came from was famous for its painted armor, but also because of this piece of white paper. It was said that at the time, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had once asked him why he did not use a mask. Xiao Zhang replied that he used a piece of white paper to cover his face because he did not want to frighten children, and it was not because he was ashamed to meet people. So why did he need to use a mask? It was just that the Xiao Zhang of that time probably could not have imagined that in the following 30-odd years, this piece of white paper on his face would bring fear to his opponent. This was Painted Armor Xiao Zhang. He was very crazy and also very arrogant. His spear was unstoppable. With Chen Chongqing's current age and level of cultivation, for him to actually be able to block one of his spears was truly an unimaginable matter. At this moment, Liang Wangsun was also looking at Chen Chongqing. He thought about the sword that Chen Chongqing had used to stab at him, as well as the sword that had split open his star domain. He was somewhat confused. Why was the first sword so berserk? The second sword even seemed to be able to think, as if it had a life of its own. What sort of sword style was this? Why had he never seen it in the ancient records of the orthodoxy? Neither he nor Xiao Zhang had imagined that this youth was even more powerful than the rumors said. When they first found out about the events that had occurred in the capital, such as the grand examination, these true experts did not think much of it. It must be known that in the grand examination 30-odd years ago, if they had also gone, snow-treading Sun Mei would not have been able to obtain first place upon the first banner. Only when Chen Chongqing had comprehended all the monoliths of the front mausoleum in a single day in the Mausoleum of Books did they realize that Chen Chongqing's talent was astonishing, but how could it be so powerful? But no matter how powerful he was, there was still a limit. A light breeze brushed past the white paper, causing it to rustle. Just like that, Chen Chongqing collapsed, sitting on the dust-covered floor. He did not bleed, but his wrist bones were shattered. He sat in front of the chair, powerless to raise the sword in his hand. Liang Wangsun looked at the chair behind Chen Chongqing. Xiao Zhang also looked at the chair. They would not forget who sat in the chair, so they understood why Chen Chongqing's sword was so powerful. Su Li sat in the chair. At some point, he had already opened his eyes. He raised his right hand and patted Chen Chongqing's head. He mocked, "You really are stupid." Chen Chongqing's voice was very weak, but it was still stubborn. "How am I stupid?" Su Li said. "Didn't you leave just now? What are you still doing here?" Chen Chongqing said, "If I leave, what will you do?" Su Li asked, "It's that simple?" Chen Chongqing asked in confusion, "Could it not be that simple?" Su Li was silent for a while, then sighed with emotion. No wonder Qiushan could not learn this sword. That girl of mine could not learn it. Even I myself could not learn it, but you did. I also very stupidly forced this chapter out slowly. Good night. I wish everyone a happy 16th of the first month. Chapter 390. Su Li then asked, "Just now, when you went downstairs, why didn't you bring the yellow paper umbrella?" The yellow paper umbrella's defensive abilities were extremely strong, able to resist the full-powered attack of a star condensation expert. In Wenshui, Chen Chongqing had heard Zhixue mention this, but in these past few days, this umbrella had always been in Su Li's hands. Moreover, after that day in the snowy plains, he had always felt that this umbrella was a sword, and had never thought of this point. Now that he heard Su Li's words, he could not help but be stunned. He honestly admitted, "I forgot." Su Li sighed, truly stupid to death. As the two spoke, Xiao Zhang did not move, Liang Wangsun did not move, and the people in the streets around the inn did not move. Because the person speaking was Su Li. In the past several hundred years, Su Li was the idol of countless people in the cultivation world, the sword spirit of the human world. He could be killed, but he could not be humiliated, because that was the same as humiliating the human world itself. At this moment, even the craziest Xiao Zhang did not mind waiting for a while. The conclusion was already decided. Everyone in the world could be killed, and the only person standing in front of Su Li, Chen Chongqing, had already been defeated. The difference in strength between the two was too great. In the era when the wildflowers of the cultivation world first bloomed, there were 4 strongest people. Snow-treading Sun Mei had died on the divine path of the mausoleum of books, leaving 3. 2 of them had come to Xuanyang City, so what could Chen Chongqing do? A broken wall behind the inn could not withstand the gentle breeze, and collapsed with a rumble. Dust rose once more. When the dust settled, the bishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jiefu, appeared in the inn. He looked at Chen Chongqing and solemnly said, "Sir is already unable to change anything, so why not let this matter end more peacefully?" Chen Chongqing lowered his head and said nothing. Su Li once more raised his right hand and patted his shoulder. Smiling, he said, "What kind of person am I? Could it be that a child like you is really prepared to stand guard by my side for the rest of your life?" Chen Chongqing understood his meaning and struggled to move to the side. When the carriage of the Liang household arrived, he stood by the window. When Xiao Zhang's gun arrived, he stood in front of the chair. Even if he fell in front of the chair. He had already done his utmost. Now, at the final moment, whether out of respect or some other reason, he should let Su Li face this storm by himself, so he stepped aside. Su Li sat on the chair, holding the yellow paper umbrella. He looked at Xiao Zhang in front of him, Liang Wangsun on the carriage, and the people on the street. His expression was calm and indifferent, as if these people were just miscellaneous people. The sky over Xuanyang City grew somewhat gloomy. The paper snow had stopped, and a light rain suddenly began to fall. The streets in the drizzle were completely silent. No one spoke for a long time. Xiao Zhang tilted his head to look at Su Li, his eyes filled with an unprecedented focus and fanaticism, as if he was admiring an extremely valuable piece of porcelain, and soon after, this porcelain would be personally broken by him. The white paper on his face was wet by the rain and slightly deformed, which made him look even more comical and terrifying. The next moment, he trembled slightly, and the sound of iron wire being knocked could be heard from behind the white paper. "How interesting! Even someone like you can die." As he said these words, Xiao Zhang's voice trembled even more. He was very excited, and also somewhat perplexed. He was excited because he was about to personally witness and participate in an important turning point in history, but the reason for his perplexed expression was even more complicated. Su Li looked at him like he was looking at a wounded little beast. He said with pity, "Every person has to die. You don't even understand such a simple principle? Everyone says that I'm somewhat interesting in your madness, but why do you seem like an idiot now?" If someone else had called him an idiot, Xiao Zhang would definitely have immediately gone mad. He would not stop until he had tortured the other party to death, but now that he heard Su Li's words, he did not even get angry. On the contrary, his eyes became incomparably sincere. He said, "Look, if the people here today aren't bastards, then they're trash. Dying at their hands is so meaningless." Su Li said unhappily, "Are you really an idiot? Dying at anyone's hands is meaningless." Xiao Zhang stuck out his chest and said, "What do you think of me? Dying at my hands is always a bit more interesting." Chen Chongqing could not help but ask, "Is this interesting?" They were all saying the same thing, but they were not the same thing. Xiao Zhang looked at him, his eyes suddenly cold, but his voice became even more deranged. He yelled, "Of course it's interesting. He's Su Li. How can he die at the hands of those trash? Of course he can only die under my spear." Yes, in the minds of many people, even if he could not fight, even if he was heavily injured and almost crippled, Su Li was still Su Li. In this world, he had never existed ordinarily, so how could he leave so ordinarily? Chen Chongqing was speechless, but Su Li himself had something to say. "I object." He looked at the crowd inside and outside the inn and said very solemnly and seriously, "No matter how I die, I don't agree." The drizzling streets became absolutely silent once more, but the atmosphere was different from before. This silence came from astonishment. Not everyone had seen Su Li, and no one had thought that the legendary junior martial uncle of Mount Li was actually this kind of person. In the final moments of his life, he still seemed so undisciplined and frivolous, without the slightest demeanor of a legendary figure. Objection overruled. Liang Wangsun walked into the ruins of the inn and looked at Su Li in the chair. After a moment of silence, he bowed and said, 10-odd years ago, when you killed 300 people of my estate, you should have known that this day would come." Then he looked at Chen Chongqing next to Su Li and said, "Just now, I said that using a life for a life is the fairest thing. Not to mention that this life of his is the repayment of 300 lives." Su Li pushed his disheveled black hair behind his shoulder and said very unconcernedly, "Whatever you say." Hearing this word, Chen Chongqing inexplicably thought of Luo Luo, and then he thought of that assassination in the Orthodox Academy. He thought of that demon assassin, he thought of Black Robe, and he thought of that battle in the snowy plains. As a result, he still persisted in his belief that this was unfair, but he no longer had the ability to persist in his opinion. The rain slowly fell, floating like silk or a bowstring. Several hundred gazes looked at the ruins of the inn, at Su Li in the chair. They were scorching yet cold, pleased yet respectful. Su Li's left hand gripped the yellow paper umbrella, but his right hand still had no intention of gripping the handle. From the snowy plains to Xuanyang City, through tens of thousands of li of wind and snow, dust and road, people had already confirmed countless times that the news was true. Su Li was indeed heavily injured and had no strength to fight, but still no one dared to look down on him. In the past several hundred years, Black Robe had personally arranged the most terrifying assassination of the demons, but it had still not killed him. How could such a person die so easily? Miracle seemed to be a word that nature had created for a person like him. The streets were deathly still, the atmosphere oppressive and tense. No one knew when Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun would make their move. Just at this moment, someone made the first move. A stone soaked by the rain flew over from the street and smashed into Su Li's face. There was a muffled slap. A stream of blood flowed down from Su Li's forehead. Chen Chongqing no longer had the strength to help him block this stone. Su Li himself also did not have the strength to block this stone, nor could he even dodge it. A legendary expert that could kill a demon general with a single strike and destroy a star condensation expert with a single glance could not even dodge a single stone. The streets were still quiet, but the atmosphere suddenly became somewhat different. In the drizzle came a burst of loud laughter. Everyone looked over and realized that it was the sect master of the Star Mystery Sect, Lin Songhai. It was precisely him who had thrown that stone. Lin Songhai looked up at the inn and laughed with resentment and delight. Su Li, even you have a day like this. Even a dog knows how to dodge a stone, but right now you're actually not even as good as a dog. In the drizzle, Su Li's clothes were completely soaked, his face pale and blood slowly flowing. He seemed very miserable. Seeing this scene, although everyone had come to kill Su Li, their moods were all different. I caught a cold. If I'm still this dizzy tomorrow, I might need to rest for a day. I'm telling everyone in advance. Chapter 391. The majority of the people in the streets around the inn were ethereal opening cultivators, and a small number had already succeeded in star condensation. In the cultivation world, they could already be considered experts, and to ordinary people, they were lofty existences. However, in the past, to Su Li, these people were nothing more than a group of ants. It was just that when faced with the swagger of these ants, they could no longer make any response. They could only lower their heads in the rain. Su Li silently gazed at the blood that flowed from the corner of his eyebrows to his chest. His face that had been washed by the rain was somewhat pale. This was because of his injuries, or perhaps it was also related to his emotions. A feeling of desolation spread out along with the rain that fell on the ruins of the inn. Just as Chen Chongqing had said, if he had not fought with the demons, how could he have suffered such heavy injuries? After leaving the snowy plains, he had been constantly pursued until he was finally trapped in Xuanyang City? How could he have been humiliated by these people? How could he even die at the hands of these people in a little while? How could this reality not make people grieve, even to the point of desolation? In the distance of the long street, Shui He slightly raised his eyebrows. He was extremely displeased with the words and actions of the sect master of the Star Mystery sect. The red cloud Qilin that he was holding on to lowered its head, allowing the rain to drip down from its fiery red mane, as if it could not bear to see what would happen next. Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun maintained their silence. The bishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jiefu, used his eyes to signal, and a priest walked into the crowd. He arrived in front of the sect master of the Star Mystery sect, Lin Songhai, and said a few words in a low voice. The resentful and joyful laughter stopped. Lin Songhai looked at the people on the second floor of the inn and sneered. If he can be killed, what does it matter if I humiliate him a few words? Truly hypocritical. He was the sect master of the Star Mystery sect, and his family was a tyrant of the north. His cultivation was also high, already at the middle level of star condensation. As a result, he had developed an arrogant and despotic temperament. He did not fear anyone, so how could he be willing to miss the chance to humiliate Su Li? Su Li raised his head and looked down at the inn. He pushed his rain-soaked hair to the back, his expression calm, as if he had not been affected by the flying rock in the rain or the previous insults. Who are you? If it were in the past, perhaps your actions really would have been a form of humiliation, but now you're not even comparable to a drowning dog. What need is there for you to put on a brave front? It's just a joke. Lin Songhai looked at the upper floor of the inn, sneered and said, "A few days ago on the roadside, you killed my Lin family's eldest son and dozens of my Lin family's elites. Today you will pay for this life." Su Li glanced at Chen Chongqing. Only now did Chen Chongqing know that this person was a relative of the Northern Land's great hero, Lin Pingyuan. On his way south, he had fought under Su Li's guidance and killed a few people. Only when he killed Lin Pingyuan did he feel any mental obstruction, because Lin Pingyuan was a bandit who did all sorts of evil, a thief whose hands were stained with the blood of the innocent. He said, "I killed Lin Pingyuan." Lin Songhai was slightly startled. Not waiting for him to say anything, Chen Chongqing continued, "If you want revenge, you should come to kill me." Lin Songhai's expression changed slightly. Still not waiting for him to speak, Chen Chongqing stared into his eyes and continued, "But I know you don't dare to come and kill me, because I am the principal of the Orthodox Academy. How would you dare to touch me?" Lin Songhai's heart trembled slightly. Chen Chongqing finally said, "So if I can survive today, I will definitely think of a way to kill you." At this moment, he was truly very angry, so he spoke very seriously. A chill surged through Lin Songhai's body. He had a rather high status in the cultivation world, especially in the northern continent, but how could he compare to the orthodoxy? With Chen Chongqing's status and position in the orthodoxy, if he truly wanted to deal with him, how could he and his sect withstand it? He suddenly felt very regretful. In a daze, he yelled out to his surroundings, "Just because the orthodoxy can use its power to bully others." After yelling these words, he had originally thought that he would receive some support. It must be known that everyone had come to kill Su Li, so they should all be on the same side. Yet he had not expected that no one in the streets would pay any attention to him. Only now did he understand. Everyone had come to kill Su Li, but no one dared to offend the Li Palace, so naturally no one dared to offend Chen Chongqing. "Why are you like a child, saying such childish things?" Su Li did not even pay attention to Lin Songhai on the street. He looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "For something like killing, it's better to just do it directly. There's no need to make any advance warning." Chen Chongqing said nothing. He took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and carefully wiped away the rain and blood on Su Li's face. "But it's also reasonable for you to be angry. For something like throwing stones, it's too childish, too vulgar, and meaningless." Su Li allowed him to wipe away the blood and said somewhat vaguely. On the side, Xiaozhang said, "Correct, it really is very meaningless." Su Li said, "Then make way." Xiaozhang said nothing, and without the slightest hesitation, he opened up a path. A path that led from the ruins of the second floor of the inn to the street. Many people noticed this and were somewhat confused. Lin Songhai was even more so. He looked at Su Li and sneered, "You old dog that can't even crawl, what are you going to do?" Su Li expressionlessly looked at him. The left hand holding the yellow paper umbrella suddenly moved. The thumb of his left hand pushed towards the handle of the umbrella. With a crack, the handle of the umbrella was slightly pulled out. The handle of the umbrella was the hilt of the sword. In the yellow paper umbrella was the heaven-shrouding sword. The sword was half unsheathed. At this time, Lin Songhai was still cursing in the street with obscenities such as dead dog. Suddenly, his voice came to a screeching halt. An extremely thin sword mark had appeared on his throat, and blood slowly seeped out from it. The people closest to him saw this scene, and their faces instantly paled. They were shocked speechless. However, Lin Songhai did not seem to know that his throat had already been cut. He still pointed at the second floor of the inn and cursed, but there was no longer any sound to be heard. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. After a moment, he finally reacted. He subconsciously touched his throat. When he pulled his hand back, he only saw a patch of bright red, and then he felt an intense pain. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fear and confusion. He painfully howled, but he was unable to howl. He turned around and wanted to escape from the inn, but as soon as he took a step back, he discovered that his 2 legs had already been cut off at the knees. Lin Songhai fell heavily into a pool of blood. He clutched his throat and gurgled. His 2 legs had already been cut off at the knees. Seeing this scene, the crowd scattered in fear, distancing themselves from him. Not too long after, Lin Songhai stopped struggling and died. But after he breathed his last, he still could not close his eyes. His eyes were filled with fear and confusion. He did not understand just what had happened. Su Li was heavily injured and on the verge of death. He was just an old dog that could not crawl, so how could he still kill him with a single strike? There were many people who were just as shocked, terrified, and confused as Lin Songhai. The street became deathly still once more. The crowd gazed at the ruins of the second floor of the inn, at the man in the chair, filled with reverence and unease. He really was worthy of being called the most powerful master of the sword in the last several hundred years. Even though he seemed to be on his last breath, a single strand of sword intent was still so powerful that it could kill a star condensation expert. Chen Chongqing was somewhat stunned, and then he felt relieved, feeling very pleased. Senior was right. For a matter like killing, one truly only needed to do it, without any warning. The handle of the umbrella gradually returned, Su Li's edge gradually receding, and he once again became an ordinary middle-aged man. He sat on the chair, gazing at Lin Songhai, who had fallen dead on the street. He expressionlessly said, "Although I can't crawl anymore, killing a person like you with a single strike is still not difficult." Liang Wangsuan's expression was abnormally grave. Xiao Zhang's eyes hidden behind the white paper grew more and more fanatical. This strike was truly too powerful. Worthy of being Su Li. Su Li truly did not disappoint the sword. "This is the sword." Xiao Zhang looked at him, not concealing his admiration or even adoration. "This strike of yours is completely capable of heavily injuring one of us, so why did you use it on such a worthless piece of trash?" "Because I hate this kind of fly the most. It's very annoying, so I killed it and finished it. As for you and Liang Wangsun, I don't really hate you, so why did I kill you? Of course, the most important thing is that in these several dozen days, I only saved up this one strike." Su Li said, "If I could save up 2 strikes and kill the 2 of you at the same time, then I would naturally save up a little." After a moment of silence, Liang Wangsun said, "I will not accept your kindness." Xiao Zhang said, "Admirable, admirable. People of this level would not waste words." 2 words of admiration naturally meant that they admired 2 things. He admired Su Li's sword. He admired Su Li even more for using this strike to kill Lin Songhai and not on them. This signified that, to Su Li, pleasure would forever be more important than gratitude or enmity. Living like this was truly very interesting. Today is the first day of quitting smoking. All sorts of discomfort. It will definitely affect my writing. I've been writing for 12 years. Old readers probably remember how many times I've quit smoking. Every time, I'm serious, but I always end up in failure. But I still refuse to admit defeat. I still want to win. Life is just like that. I hope I can succeed this time, because I feel that challenging myself is the greatest meaning of living. I encourage everyone and ask for your support. Also, I might have written a little crudely recently. From the day after tomorrow, I will update twice. Chapter 392. The people in the streets of Xuanyang City were all stunned by Su Li's sword. Even someone as insane as Xiao Zhang could not help but express his admiration. But Chen Chongqing didn't think so. On the contrary, he felt a little sad. In the eyes of the crowd, Su Li held the yellow paper umbrella in his hand and pierced through the rain with his sword. He had easily and noiselessly beheaded a star condensation expert. This was truly a cultivation and realm that could shock the world. But when he left the garden of Zhou for the snowy plains, he had once seen Su Li's true sword. At that time, Su Li also held the yellow paper umbrella in his hand, but the handle was not completely unsheathed. Sword intent pierced through the snow, traveling several dozen li. A demon general on the edge of the snowy plains fell to the ground, its mountainous shadow abruptly severed. Compared to that demon general, what did a scoundrel like Lin Songhai count for? Compared to that sword from back then, what was this sword in the rain in Xuanyang City? After several dozen days in the south, Su Li had finally managed to save up a single strike. It was not even a tenth of his peak, but it still possessed a heaven-shaking might. If he could return to his peak, no, even if his injuries were slightly lighter, just who could kill him? Who would dare to kill him? Unfortunately, there was only cold reality in the human world. There were no ifs. Everything was really over after this sword. No one else is coming? Su Li gazed at Xuanyang City in the rain, at the guests that had come to participate in this banquet. After a very long time, he shook his head and calmly said, "It seems that no one else will come." The question was asked by him, and the answer was answered by him. Between the question and the answer, there was an indescribable sense of vicissitudes and disappointment. His expression was still as indifferent as before. He said to Chen Chongqing, "You see, in the end, reality proved that I was right." Chen Chongqing remained silent, thinking that there was no point in arguing about this now. Su Li's expression became serious, and his tone was also extremely heavy. "Other than an idiot like you, or perhaps an idiot, who would help others for no reason. Who in this world can be trusted?" Even now, no one from the Mountly Sword sect had come, not even a word. The other sects of the Longevity sect and Holy Maiden Peak also remained silent. The South was admittedly far away, but words and attitudes should not have had enough time to appear in Xuanyang City, to appear before the people of the world. Sadly, those words and attitudes didn't appear. Perhaps this indicated the attitude of the entire human world towards Su Li. Regardless of North or South, regardless of the people, they all wanted him dead. As he gazed at the silent Su Li in the rain, Chen Chongqing suddenly felt very sad. His nose was somewhat sore, his eyes somewhat dry, and his voice somewhat tense. Perhaps something has happened to Mountly. The so-called legends were often lonely when they came to an end. But Chen Chongqing could not bear to see this scene. Whether it was in the stories or in the classics of the orthodoxy, he did not like to see the words "the banquet is over." He did not want Su Li to depart so sorrowfully. Su Li looked at him and smiled. "You idiot, is that supposed to be comforting?" In the rain, Xuanyang City was quiet and slightly cold, growing colder and colder. The sound of a zither suddenly came from somewhere in the distance. He didn't know who was playing the zither. Perhaps it was a musician from the Liang household, or perhaps it was Liang Hongzhuang's bosom friend. The sound of the zither was sobbing, and the singing was hoarse. One could vaguely hear the words "loyal soul" and "old city," but they couldn't be clearly heard. Liang Hongzhuang remained silent as he listened to the song. His tattered dancing clothes fluttered in the wind and rain as he walked away with his sleeves behind his back. Shui He led the Red Cloud Qilin, bowed silently towards the inn, and turned to leave. The sound of the zither gradually faded, the singing gradually faded, and then, "Ya!" Xiao Zhang bellowed. The white paper covering his face rustled. The spear stabbed straight at Su Li. Liang Wangsun held the Vajra scepter in his hand. His steps were as heavy as a lotus, and his expression was as smooth as jade. His aura enveloped the entire inn. A violent gale arose and Chen Chongqing was thrown onto the ground, unable to get up. The song was about to end. That was the day of Su Li's death. However, someone refused to let the song stop. It was not Liang Hongzhuang, who had turned around and left, dancing in rags. It wasn't Divine General Shui, who returned with a broken armor and a qilin. It wasn't that the musicians in the mansion wanted to continue playing, and it wasn't that a soulmate wanted to play to the end of the world. That zither sound, that song, had indeed ended. However, in the inn, or more accurately, below the inn, there was a clear sound of impact, like the sound of wood, like the sound of a bamboo zither. In short, it continued this zither song. The clear and melodious sound of impact rang out rhythmically, as if it had given the song a new life. Liang Hongzhuang and Shui He, who had parted ways on the long street, stopped at the same time. They suddenly turned around to look at the inn, their faces filled with shock. Pa, pa pa, pa pa pa. Just what sort of object was making this sound? The counter below the inn was very old, its paint peeling off. There was an abacus on it. The beads of the abacus were incessantly striking. The person fiddling with the beads was no longer at the counter. With the clear sound of impact, several dozen white streams of air appeared in the ruins of the inn. Seeing those streams of air, Liang Wangsuan's expression was solemn. His imperial robe whistled and his eyes shone like stars. Xiao Zhang's expression instantly became incomparably shocked, and then it exploded. Qi La. The floorboards between the first and second floors of the inn were like fragile paper, shattering just like that. A blade broke through the floorboards, breaking through several dozen balls of qi. With an incomparably terrifying howl, it chopped at Xiao Zhang. Xiao Zhang's entrance had been so arrogant, but this blade was even more arrogant. Because this blade had no intention of blocking his spear. It was chopping at the person behind the spear. This was clearly telling Xiao Zhang, my blade will definitely be faster, heavier, and fiercer than your spear. Before your spear can kill Su Li, my blade will definitely chop off your head. Seeing this blade chopping at him, Xiao Zhang was shocked and then angry. He recognized this blade. He knew that this blade had been personally forged by the Wenshui old master and had been gifted to him for free. He also knew that although this blade seemed ordinary, it actually possessed a might that even gods and ghosts would find difficult to block. He wanted to say something, but he realized that it was difficult for him to make a sound. The blade whimpered, like the weeping of a poor scholar, like the weeping of a child whose home had been ruined. This blade was very angry. Xiao Zhang had clashed with this blade countless times. After Sun Mei entered the mausoleum of books, he was the one who had clashed with this blade the most. Of course, he was also the one who had lost the most. But he had never seen such a terrifying saber before. The dark clouds in the sky above Xuanyang City seemed to have been cut open, and a blue sky could faintly be seen. Xiao Zhang knew that he could not retreat, or else he would assuredly lose to this blade. It was even possible that his Dao heart and his will to fight would be shattered by this angry blade, and he would become a cripple for the rest of his life. His two hands tightly gripping the spear, he smashed it horizontally at the blade. A loud bang resounded. The white paper floated in the air, blood dripping onto it. Xiao Zhang flew backwards, blood spurting from his mouth as he crashed into the courtyard across from the inn. In the dust and rubble, his roar of anger and unwillingness resounded. Wang Pe, you actually launched a sneak attack. Writing a novel while quitting smoking is definitely one of the most painful things in the world. For me to be able to hold on and write it, this chapter is not bad. I admire myself very much. Tomorrow, I want to write 2 chapters, but I suddenly realize that this is really very difficult, it's really uncomfortable to the point of dying. Chapter 393. A clear whistle resounded through the inn. Liang Wangsun finally moved, rushing in front of that person. His movement technique was open and aboveboard, like a crouching tiger or coiling dragon. It floated over, yet it was as heavy as a mountain. In his hand, he held a golden pestle that emitted boundless light like the spring sun, warm and mellow. In short, whether it was his movement technique or his technique, they both had the bearing of a king, making it impossible for others to think of dodging. This was the first time Liang Wangsun had truly moved. His eyes were incomparably bright, his expression incomparably solemn, and he had used his most powerful technique. Because he was keenly aware of how powerful his opponent was, Chen Chongqing's heart shivered. He thought to himself, if Liang Wangsun had used such a powerful technique on the carriage, would he still have had the chance to break through this light and return to the inn? With his current level of cultivation, he simply had no way of dealing with Liang Wangsun's technique of light, because this technique was too bright, upright, and peerless. He could not break through it, nor could he respond. He could only forcefully endure it, stubbornly endure it, and then die. Because this was Liang Wangsun's most powerful technique, even that person could not avoid it, could not break it. That person chose to forcefully receive it. A palm broke through the falling rain. In front of Su Li and Chen Chongqing, it noiselessly and swiftly arrived in front of them, blocking Liang Wangsun's Vajra pestle. That palm was very slender, very suitable for holding a blade, but the center of the palm seemed rather thick. It was very clear that it had held the blade for too long, Or perhaps it was precisely because of this that this palm very easily gripped the tip of the Vajra pestle. It was like gripping the hilt of a blade. Boundless light completely converged between the 5 fingers. 2 powerful chis, 2 almost perfect star domains, met in this grip. Just at this moment, an angry roar came from the other side of the street. Xiao Zhang shot back like a flying stone, carrying his body covered in dust and rain, carrying a sky full of gravel as he rushed to the inn. The metal spear thrusted again with wind and thunder. After being injured, Xiao Zhang became even crazier. The white paper covering his face was covered in specks of blood, contrasting with his eyes. They were incomparably serene and terrifying, and even possessed a violent qi that blazed brighter than the sun. That person stood in front of Su Li Anchen Chongqing, his left hand gripping the Vajra pestle. He looked at Liang Wangsun calmly and attentively, as if he had not even noticed Xiao Zhang's tyrannical return. However, the moment the spear fell, his sleeves moved. Amidst the drizzle and breeze, his green sleeves rippled slightly. Then, the momentum of his saber rose again. That person brandished his blade and chopped down at Xiao Zhang. His movements were abnormally simple. It could be said that he swung his blade freely, but it could also be said that he played it down. It even gave off a feeling that he didn't care at all. It was still the spear that rose first, and the momentum of the saber followed. However, the edge of the saber was not aimed at the spear, but at Xiao Zhang, the pale white paper behind the spear. This was because this seemingly ordinary saber was faster and stronger than the tyrannical spear. Xiao Zhang was furious, unwilling, pained, and crazed, but he had no choice but to raise his spear and block. In this world, not many people could block Xiao Zhang's spear. In this world, there was only this person who would never block his gun and would only force him to use his gun to block. Therefore, Xiao Zhang hated this person very much. Whenever he saw him, he would feel extremely irritated and pained. A loud boom resounded. The spear and the saber met again in the inn. At this time, Liang Wangsuan's radiance was still in that person's hand, still burning, still releasing energy. The names of these 3 people were all the most resounding names in the world. After being separated for so long, they had finally met in Xuanyang City. 3 terrifying qis met in this place. 3 powerful domains met in this place. The edge of the blade pierced through the air, the energy of the spear wanted to tear apart the heavens, and light enveloped the surroundings. Waves of qi gushed out of the inn, and a gale suddenly arose in Xuanyang City. Yet the ruins of the inn were strangely quiet. There was no wind, not even a sound. Liang Wangsuan's eyes were as bright as stars, but the hair at his temples was already wet. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face was like an unmoving mountain, but blood was walking on it, like the traces of worms. That person stood in front of Su Li Anchen Chongqing, one hand gripping the blade, the other gripping the pestle. It was like he was standing in front of the doorstep, but it was impossible to tell whether he was going to open the door or close it. In the end, his saber fell. So it was closing the door. The uninvited guest was invited out of the doorstep. The blade descended with an unstoppable momentum. Not even Xiao Zhang could stop it. The owner of the spear trembled and buzzed. Xiao Zhang was forced to retreat once more. The blade followed him the entire time. The white paper fluttered and the kite flew off to some unknown place. Xiao Zhang retreated the entire way, destroying countless courtyards. The edge of the blade descended, and thunder boomed without end, resounding through all of Xuanyang City. Everywhere, houses collapsed. Dust flew everywhere, and dust flew everywhere. Only Xiao Zhang's figure could be faintly seen. Finally, Xiao Zhang suppressed the blade energy of this blade, and steadied his feet. At this moment, he was already in the western part of the city, 7 li from the inn. He gazed at the distant inn and let out a furious yell. "Wang Pu, you've gone mad!" The blade left his hand. That person had no weapon. He did not need a weapon. His left hand still gripped the Vajra pestle. Liang Wangsuan's boundless light was grasped in his hand. He gazed at Liang Wangsun, his eyes carrying an undisguised fierceness. Retreat or defeat? Liang Wangsuan's eyes grew brighter and brighter, like stars on the verge of destruction. As the descendant of a sovereign, his glory and pride lay in not retreating a single step. That person understood, so he said no more and clenched his hand. Clenching was clenching the blade. Clenching the blade was clenching the fist. The person punched, gathering the light in the center of the fist, and then smashing it. There was a massive boom, like spring thunder from a very distant place, like a gushing spring at the bottom of an abyss. In reality, it was the annihilation of the energy between his fingers. Liang Wangsuan's face instantly paled and the light in his eyes rapidly dimmed, like the stars had lost their luster. He stared at that person, his face filled with disbelief. In shock he asked, "You've gone mad?" The edge of the blade descended and thunder boomed. The fist shattered the light and thunder boomed. Countless peals of thunder resounded through Xuanyang City. The loudest peal of thunder, came from that person's body. Boom! A fierce gale blew, a crushing chi, and the inn finally completely collapsed. Broken stones and tiles flew everywhere. Countless people were hit and fell down one after another. Dust flew everywhere, and soon after, it was drenched by the rain. Seeing that the building had collapsed, the people that had originally been in the building had already appeared in the rainy sky. The people that had originally been on the second floor had now come to the ground. Su Li was still sitting in his chair, as if he had not noticed at all. Xiao Zhang walked over from the other end of the rainy street. A corner of the white paper on his face had already rotted away, revealing the terrifying wound beneath. The hand that gripped the spear incessantly trembled. Liang Wangsuan's face was snow-white. The hand that gripped the Vajra pestle was similarly trembling. That person was still as silent as ever, as calm as ever. He was dressed in black, somewhat thin and tall. He was quiet and taciturn, his eyebrows slightly drooping, and his entire body was lonely. For some reason, seeing him made one feel wretched. It was not ordinary wretchedness, but the wretchedness after riches and honor, the bleakness after blooming. He did not look around, nor was he proud. He only stood in front of Su Li and Chen Changsheng. But even if painted armor Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun joined hands, they still could not pass. Because he was Wangpu. First on the proclamation of liberation, Wangpu of Tianliang. The next chapter will definitely be very, very late. I'm warning you in advance. Chapter 394. Several decades ago, a young man appeared in Tianliang County. His name was Wangpu. From the day he appeared, the era of blooming wildflowers in the cultivation world had officially arrived. He was a genius in cultivation and also a genius in battle. Whether it was cultivation talent or battle ability, he would forever be the strongest amongst the cultivators of his generation. After Zhou Dufu, he was the only one who had surpassed the cultivation of his generation, undoubtedly the strongest expert. From the proclamation of Azure Sky to the proclamation of Golden Distinction, and then to the proclamation of Liberation, he was first place in all of them. He was even more glorious than Qiushan Jun and Su Yorong. Whether it was the snow-treading Sun Mei who had obtained first place on the first banner in the grand examination or Liang Wangsun who had burst forth with the inheritance of a noble clan after 1,000 years of accumulation, none of them could even catch a glimpse of his back. Because of him, Sun Mei had bitterly cultivated in the mausoleum of books for more than 30 years, unable to leave. In order to surpass him, painted armor Xiao Zhang, famed for his arrogance and madness, had even suffered qi deviation and almost become a cripple. He had already cultivated to the peak of star condensation, only below the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions. Other than a peerless expert like Su Li who traveled the 4 seas, or a legend of the previous generation like divine General Han Qing, no one was stronger than him. And it could not be forgotten that he had only formally begun cultivating a few decades ago. The human world looked favorably upon him as someone who could enter the saint realm and become the next saint, or perhaps replace one of the storms of the 8 directions. It was even highly possible that he could go even further and enter the legendary concealed divinity realm. The street was deathly still. The crowd looked at the blue-clothed middle-aged man in the ruins of the inn, not daring to make a sound. On one end of the street, Liang Hongzhuang had an abnormally complex expression. As he thought of the events of many years ago, his charming and unmanly face flushed with an unhealthy red, his mind clearly agitated. On the other end of the street, Divine General Shui, he looked at the blade in Chen Chongqing's hand and thought of the words Su Li had said to him a few days ago. His heart was filled with an indescribable sense of defeat. At the time, Shui he had asked Su Li why the people of the world believed that he could not catch up to Wang Pe. Su Li had told him that whether it was the blade or the person, he was too far away from Wang Pe. When he asked for the reason, Su Li said it was because he wanted to use 7 blades while Wang Pe only used 1. This answer seemed to make him understand something, but it was only when he saw the blade in Wang Po's hand send Xiao Zhang flying twice and cause the walls of Xuanyang City to collapse that he realized that Su Li's answer had been perfunctory. That he was inferior to Wang Pe had nothing to do with how many sabers he used. Even if Wang Pe was willing to use 365 sabers and change a saber every day, he would still be inferior to Wang Pe. The difference in cultivation level between him and Wang Pe was too great. This had nothing to do with willpower and willpower, it was only related to talent. This kind of understanding made one feel despair and sorrow. Wang Po's appearance had dealt an enormous mental blow to Liang Hongzhuang and Shui He, who were preparing to leave. It had also placed an enormous pressure on all of Xuanyang City, especially on those people within the city that wanted to kill Su Li, so much so that the city was deathly still. Only Chen Chongqing, amidst his shock, felt an infinite warmth. Yes, not ecstasy, but warmth. Ecstasy was oftentimes a pleasant surprise that came from the unexpected. Warmth, more peaceful, more profound, more lasting. It was a kind of gratification when one's thoughts and wishes perfectly coincided with reality. He did not know why Wang Pe had appeared in Xuanyang City, but he thanked Wang Pe for his appearance. For Su Li, for himself, for those naive and childish thoughts, he thanked Wang Pe for his appearance. Just at this moment, Wang Pe's body slightly swayed and then he began to cough. He coughed up blood, and each mouthful of blood contained spirit and vigor. Everyone could see that with each cough, he became a little more exhausted and haggard. Even if he was Wang Pe, when confronting opponents on the level of Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, especially when fighting 1 against 2, it was still difficult to say that he was certain of victory. In order to force them back with a single blade, he had used an extremely forceful method, so much so that he had received injuries that he should not have received. A light breeze blew across the ruins of the inn. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face flapped, but the bewilderment in his eyes did not disperse. Liang Wangsuan's expression was unprecedentedly solemn, but at the same time, it was also filled with intense shock and confusion. In the battle, Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun had both cried out in alarm. They felt that Wang Pe had gone mad. They were both people on the proclamation of liberation and had often sparred with each other since they were young. In truth, they were very familiar with Wang Pe. They knew Wang Pe's personality, Wang Pe's cultivation, Wang Pe's camp, Wang Pe's likes and dislikes, and Wang Pe's style of doing things. They knew that although Wang Pe was now half the master of Scholatry Manor, he had never considered himself a southerner. Moreover, Wang Pe could not possibly have the slightest favorable impression of Mount Li. Crucially, Wang Pe did not like Su Li. Su Li was too undisciplined, like a cloud, while Wang Pe was too self-disciplined, like an account book that had been flipped through countless times. Why had he saved Su Li? They were both peak star condensation experts, so they were well aware of Wang Pe's cultivation. Wang Pe was naturally ridiculously strong, but it was absolutely impossible for him to so casually defeat the two of them working together, even inflicting injuries that they could not recover from in a short period of time. The only possibility was that Wang Pe had used his most forceful method, so much so that he had also been heavily injured. Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun were currently heavily injured and had no strength to continue fighting. Wang Pe seemed to still have strength to spare, but in reality, he had paid even more, even possibly affecting his future cultivation career. Why? Why had he been so forceful and resolute, not caring about the price? Why was he willing to pay such a large price for a southerner? Why did you save him? The white paper was speckled with blood, like plum blossoms, making Xiao Zhang's eyes seem all the more bloodthirsty and fearful. He stared fixedly at Wang Pe, feeling the true essence wreaking havoc in his meridians. His voice was hoarse, filled with anger and confusion. Wang Pe was somewhat tired, and the ends of his eyebrows drooped even more, making him seem even more wretched. Coupled with his blue clothes that had been washed so many times that they were faintly white, he really did look like an accountant in an ordinary inn. He asked Xiao Zhang in reply, "Why did you kill him?" Xiao Zhang did not pretend to think. He confidently replied, even grandly and grandly, "Because I don't like him." Wang Pe was quiet for a while, then no longer paid any attention to this madman. He turned to Liang Wangsun. Liang Wangsun's face was pale, and his eyes gradually turned from dim to bright. "I have a grudge with him." This was a calm and powerful reason. Wang Pe replied, "Don't fight for a moment." Liang Wangsun replied, "Seize every moment." Wang Pe replied, "Not righteousness." Liang Wangsun replied, "Your righteousness is not my righteousness." Wang Pe replied, "Righteousness is great profit." Liang Wangsun said no more. Wang Pe turned to Xiao Zhang, looked into the eyes behind the white paper, and said, "You don't like him, so you want to kill him. I don't like you, so you want to kill him, so I won't let you kill him." Just like the question and answer between Su Li and Chen Chongqing, many things in the world were just this simple. Wang Pu of Tianliang was truly not simple. Hello everyone. My name is Not Simple. See you tomorrow. Chapter 395. The long street was completely silent. Several hundred people actually did not make a single sound. Chen Chongqing stood in the ruins of the inn and glanced at Hua Jiefu. Previously, the Archbishop of Xuanyang City had warned him that an important figure from Scholartree Manor was currently traveling in the north and was highly likely to bring about a great deal of trouble. Now it seemed that the orthodoxy truly was the strongest power on the continent. It could even accurately detect such a secret. It was just that the Archbishop had miscalculated. That person was not trouble, and besides that, Su Li was also wrong. Chen Chongqing looked at Wang Po's back and said to Su Li, "You see, in the end, there are still people willing to help you. This world is not blindly dark and worthy of trust." In the chilly drizzle, Wang Po stood like a lonely tree. He had forced back Liang Wangsun and Xiao Zhang, using incomparably forceful methods to hack at them until they were powerless to continue fighting. For this reason, he had also suffered heavy injuries. He coughed up blood and his voice seemed rather weak. "Let's go," he said without turning around. Chen Chongqing knew that these words were meant for him. He helped Su Li up from the chair and followed Wang Po. One step at a time, they walked across the rain-soaked broken beams and gravel, heading towards the street. Su Li felt that this was rather exhausting. Most importantly, he had to be supported by Chen Chongqing, so he could not walk freely and at ease. Furthermore, he had to be watched by several hundred people. This would severely damage his legend. Before entering the city, I already said, "Don't let go of those two furry deer in a hurry," but you just wouldn't listen. He angrily complained to Chen Chongqing, "I don't care, hurry up and find me a mount." Chen Chongqing felt very helpless. He thought to himself, where would he find a mount at this time? He said, "Wait until we leave the city." Su Li pointed at the red cloud Qilin, that Shui. He was leading on the other end of the street. This beast isn't bad, it can fly. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, the entire continent knows that it's not bad, but the problem is that it's not yours, nor is it mine. It's the mount of a divine general of the great Zhou that wants to kill you. If you don't hurry up and leave Xuanyang City, what's the point of doing this? Su Li looked at the expression on his face and forced himself to say, if it really doesn't work, the imperial carriage of the Liang household is also fine. Chen Chongqing was silent. He thought that he was wrong. He shouldn't have walked back when they were at the Snow Ridge hot spring. While the two were talking, Wang Po was quietly waiting in front of them. He seemed very patient. Suddenly, he turned around and walked towards the crowd. He stopped in front of a cultivator and extended his right hand. That cultivator was leading a yellow horse. The sound of hoofbeats could be heard as Wang Po led the horse back and handed the reins over to Chen Chongqing. He then turned around and continued walking towards the other end of the street while carrying the blade. Looking at his back, Chen Chongqing was slightly startled. He didn't expect him to be such an interesting person. He looked like a shabby bookkeeper, but a wonderful bookkeeper. Wang Po is a very interesting person. When he was working as an accountant in Wenshui City, I had a very good opinion of him, but his eyebrows aren't good, too shabby, too distressed. Su Li rode on the yellow horse, his mood much better. He was in the mood to chat and reminisce about the past. He pointed at Wang Po and said, if he was a little more handsome, I would definitely have treated him a little better back then. Wang Po should have heard these words. His steps paused for a moment, then he continued forward, trampling through the rainwater on the street. Just at this moment, the rain falling from the sky also gradually stopped. The distant sky revealed a dark blue color. Many people had come to attend this banquet in Xuanyang City. There were painted armor Xiao Zhang, Liang Wangsun, and other people on the proclamation of liberation, as well as many other powers. At this moment, the banquet was about to come to an end, but there were still many people that were unwilling to leave. These people had a blood feud with Su Li, an old grudge that could not be resolved. Wang Po's blade could force back Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, but it could not intimidate the hearts of people. Since these people had come to kill Su Li, they had already placed their lives on the line. They were not even afraid of death, so they naturally would not be afraid of Wang Po. The gray stones on the street had been soaked by the rain, turning into countless black ink stones. Many people stood on the sides of the street. Wang Po held his blade in front while Chen Chongqing held the reins in the back. The clattering was the sound of rain dripping from the eaves, the sound of blood dripping, and also the sound of the beating of hearts. The gazes of the crowd were very complex. Reverence, fear, anger, and unwillingness. The expression on Wang Po's face did not change in the slightest. Chen Chongqing looked at his feet. Su Li still looked at the sky, extremely undisciplined. In the eyes of his enemies, he naturally seemed especially repulsive. Someone finally could not hold it in any longer. Rushing into the street, he yelled, Su Li, hand over your life. Chen Chongqing remained silent, his left hand already gripping the hilt of his sword. Su Li continued to look at the sky, not caring in the slightest. On their journey south from the snowy plains, on their return journey of tens of thousands of li, the two had already encountered far too many attacks. Now, there was one more person in the group returning south, going from 2 to 3, so they had even less to worry about. The sharp and steady saber intent pierced through the air. With a muffled sound, that person did not even have the time to sweep to the center of the street before he was sent flying back. He crashed heavily against the wall and fainted amidst the smoke and dust. Another person arrived and was once again sent flying by the metal blade. The long street of Xuanyang City was filled with flying figures, spurting blood, muffled cries of misery, and howls of pain and despair. Wang Po raised his blade and walked at the very front. He only raised his blade and seemed to casually strike, but not a single person was able to get past his blade and approach Su Li, whether that person was an initial-level star condensation expert of the North or a genius of some sect. From start to finish, he did not use the edge of his blade, so no one died. On both sides of the long street were cultivators who had fallen to the ground and found it hard to get back up. He truly was the strongest expert on the proclamation of liberation. Unless a saint personally came or the storms of the 8 directions appeared, who could stop Wang Pu of Tianliang? Chen Chongqing still tightly gripped the hilt of his sword, silent and vigilant. His gaze did not stop on Wang Pu's body, nor did it fall on that unpredictable blade, even though he was keenly aware that this was a very rare opportunity to learn. Instead, it always fell on those places on the side of the street that were very easy to miss. Broken walls, drooping eaves, injured cultivators, and a cursing youth. He was about to leave Xuanyang City, but it was also the most dangerous moment. He had never forgotten that assassin that had always been hiding in the darkness, that assassin that had already silently followed him and Su Li for several thousand li, that third assassin in the world with a terrifying patience. That assassin with an extremely ordinary name, Lu Qing. He felt that Lu Qing would strike. Wang Pu had already come. If Lu Qing did not take advantage of the final moments of chaos in Xuanyang City to strike, once they left Xuanyang City, it was highly likely that Lu Qing would never find another opportunity to strike. In the end, just like Su Li, he would fall into the most awkward of situations. The walls of Xuanyang City gradually approached. Once they turned the corner, they could see the tightly shut city gate. Just at this moment, Liang Wangsun said something. From the moment they had left the inn, Liang Wangsun had followed them. He was already powerless to strike, but he was not willing to leave. He wanted to see if Su Li could still survive, wanted to see if the heavens would open their eyes. He said to Wang Pu, "Although the world is vast, there is no place that Su Li can take shelter in. Where can you take him?" Wang Pu stopped. The yellow buckskin horse stopped. Wang Pu turned to him and said, "I will send him back to Mount Li." Chen Chongqing had brought Su Li for tens of thousands of li. Then, he would also bring Su Li for tens of thousands of li, so what if he walked back to Mount Li? But, even if you send him back to Mount Li, what meaning would there be? An indifferent voice came from the other side of the street. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, yes, if Mount Li really did change, what could Su Li do even if he returned to Mount Li? Could it be that the world is so vast that it really can't contain him? Then, he suddenly became alert and turned to the source of the voice. Who was talking? Wang Pu's expression became extremely solemn and speechless. He was very vigilant, countless times more vigilant than when he was facing Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun together. Seeing that person slowly appear from the corner of the street, Chen Chongqing felt his body grow very cold. It can't be. He silently thought to himself. Suddenly, he was incomparably angry. A story should not have this sort of ending. A feast that ate people, why should it end according to the wishes of the host? Anger originated from helplessness. At this moment, Chen Chongqing felt very helpless, because he had truly lost all hope. Whether it was when he faced Shui, he or Liang Hongzhuang in the wilderness, or when he saw the Liang household's imperial carriage in the inn, he had never felt despair. Even when he faced Xiao Zhang's spear and couldn't even raise his sword, he still did not feel despair. Because he was still alive. Su Li was still alive. He believed that there were assuredly people in this world who would come and help them. He had shouted those 4 words to the bright and beautiful spring light of Xuanyang City, and there would definitely be an echo. As expected, Wang Pu had come. He had braved the wind and treaded the rain to come. But now this person had actually also come. Even the brightest and most beautiful spring light would eventually dissipate. The echo that could not be forgotten would also dissipate. Even if there were still people willing to help them, what use would it be? Right now, who could help them? A middle-aged man appeared from the corner of the street. This person's long hair draped over his shoulders, but one could faintly make out many traces of snow within. It was so much so that it was impossible to tell just how many years he had lived, how many years he had cultivated. Several decades or several centuries. This person was very tall, very thin. This person had an extraordinary bearing, incomparably confident and at ease, because he was the leader of a noble clan. This person had a very cold expression, because he was the sect master of the emotion-severing sect. As he gazed at Wang Pu and Chen Chongqing, he possessed a tyrannical and condescending aura. Even as he gazed at Su Li, he made no attempt to conceal his confidence and arrogance. His name shook the 8 directions, obscured by the wind and rain. The people who had come were precisely the storms of the 8 directions. Zhu Luo. He was the strongest expert of the continent. He was the god of the cultivation world. The long street of Xuanyang City was quiet, and then countless voices rose up. Several hundred cultivators all prostrated. Liang Wangsun clasped his hands and bowed. The white paper on Xiao Zheng's face moved. Wang Pu did not move, did not bow, only calmly gazed across from him. Chen Chongqing also did not bow. He had forgotten to bow. Su Li sat on his horse, looking down from above. He looked at Zhu Luo and said, "You old fellows finally couldn't hold it in any longer." Zhu Luo replied, "It's just that I can't bear to personally kill you, so I don't want to meet you." Su Li was quiet for a while, then sighed. "It seems that my view back then really was not wrong." Zhu Luo asked, "What view?" Su Li looked at him and seriously said, "You're all bastards, old bastards. Quitting smoking has really had too great of an effect on my writing. I've always been working hard, getting better and better." Chapter 396. As one of the storms of the 8 directions, Zhu Luo very rarely appeared before the eyes of the common people, but he had to come today. In truth, neither Wang Pu nor the cultivators in Xuanyang City were surprised by his appearance. What sort of person was Su Li? In order to kill him, Black Robe had not hesitated to use the Garden of Zhou as a catalyst to weave a scheme. The demons had arranged such a grand array in the wilderness in front of Xuelao City. Now, the human world also wanted to kill him. How could those assassins and experts on the level of Shui He and Liang Hongzhuang be enough? Even if the several hundred cultivators in Xuanyang City were added, even if Wang Pu, Xiao Zhang, and Liang Wangsun, the 3 strongest experts of the middle generation, were added, it would still not be enough. Whether it was to send him off or to invite his soul, at this important moment in history that concerned Su Li's life or death, even if saints like the Divine Empress and the Pope could not appear, the storms of the 8 directions had to appear. Zhu Luo, who was like a god in the eyes of the common people, had descended from the sky to the ground, into the noisy and chaotic world of mortals. He had appeared in Xuanyang City, on the other end of the long street, precisely for this reason. He had come to kill Su Li. Thinking about the forest outside Honshu City, the pavilion outside the forest, and the image of that otherworldly expert with long hair draped over his shoulders, Chen Chongqing felt very bad. Only after hearing Su Li's words did he understand. They were all people who lived in the world, so how could there really be an otherworldly expert who ate the wind and slept in the open, who did not eat the food of the common people? Since they were people of the world, it was inevitable that they would do some shameful things, whether they were voluntary or forced. Chen Chongqing gazed at Zhu Luo's indifferent face and said nothing. He thought of the words Tang 36 had said under the banyan tree in the Orthodox Academy. No one's moral character would naturally improve as they grew older. The vast majority of the time, it was a young idiot who became an old idiot, old bastard, old idiot. These were all filthy words, but at this moment they were powerful and resonating. Chen Chongqing would not say such filthy words, but as he looked at Zhu Luo across the street, he could not help but think of these words. His feeling was not wrong. The current Zhu Luo was no longer that aloof and ethereal otherworldly expert under the pavilion outside Honshu City, nor was he that human warrior who had beheaded the second demon general with a single strike several hundred years ago on the snowy plains under the moonlight. The current Zhu Luo was the leader of a noble clan, a member of a clan of the Great Zhou, an expert of the continent, a person, an ordinary person. An ordinary person who could kill for his own benefit. After Wang Pe bowed, he quietly stood in front of Su Li and Chen Chongsheng. He did not speak or move, so he naturally had no intention of stepping aside. He did not even sheathe the blade in his hand. When facing the storms of the 8 directions, whose seniority, status, and strength were all far above his, this silence and motionlessness was very disrespectful. Zhu Luo looked at him and said, "I didn't want to appear, but you forced me to." This was referring to Wang Po's seemingly steady, but actually crazy strike of his blade. He had paid a grievous price in the future to heavily injure Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, and then he had successively broken through the crowd of Xuanyang heroes. He was just about to bring Su Li out of the city. If Zhu Luo did not appear now, Wang Pe might really be able to go against the general trend of the human world and help Su Li survive. With Zhu Luo's status in the human world, these words of his were an extremely high praise for Wang Pe, even though when he said these words, there was no expression on his face. Of course, praise was not praise, and it certainly did not represent appreciation. To be more precise, Zhu Luo had used these words to clearly and even somewhat unhappily express his appreciation and disapproval of Wang Pe. After saying these words, Zhu Luo turned to Chen Chongsheng and yelled, "His Holiness is in the Li Palace, deeply worried. Your teachers, friends, and relatives are all worried about your safety. Millions of people are in the capital wishing you well, hoping that you will live. But in the end, you are alive, yet you have been delayed on the road for so long. What do you want to do? Don't tell me you're not prepared to return." Compared to the tone of a senior that he had used when speaking to Wang Pe, his tone of speaking to Chen Chongsheng was even more impolite. Although Chen Chongsheng was currently the principal of the Orthodox Academy, he was still young. Moreover, from Mei Lisha's perspective, he believed that he was Chen Chongsheng's true elder, so it was inevitable that he would be somewhat strict. His last words were almost like a lecture and a scolding. Chen Chongsheng did not open his mouth to speak. It was not because he had no face to face his teachers in the capital, nor was it because he was ashamed of his elders' teachings. It was because he was still very angry. He was worried that if he opened his mouth to refute, it would appear that he did not respect his elder enough. Wang Pe also did not speak, because he felt that he did not need to speak. He did not need the admiration of others, even if that person was Zhu Luo. The street was quiet. No one spoke. From the moment Zhu Luo appeared, besides Su Li's undisciplined voice, the entire Xuanyang city could only hear his voice. The storms of the 8 directions were the strongest, whether it was in Xuanyang city or the entire continent. So even if his voice was very indifferent, it was still like the rumbling of spring thunder. The entire world had to carefully listen. Let alone the fact that he had appeared on the streets of Xuanyang city this time, representing the collective will of the Great Zhou imperial court. He, who was incomparably close to the Chen imperial clan, had clearly long since reached some sort of agreement with the Divine Empress and the Orthodoxy. The Divine Empress, the Li Palace, and Zhu Luo. These were the 3 great mountains of the Great Zhou dynasty. Chen Chongsheng had originally grown up in one of these mountains, a young pine. Because of his high position, he had received great respect and his status was also very high. But now, he had to contend against the will of this great mountain beneath his feet, and he also had to face the shadow of another great mountain. What could he do? He turned to Wang Pe. Wang Pe's tall and thin body gently swayed in the chilly wind. He really did seem very much like a sturdy and healthy pine tree. It was not so thick that it could not be struck down by lightning, but at the very least, It would not easily be changed by the winds blowing in from all directions. Zhu Luo had come. He did not prostrate, did not step aside, did not retreat. He slightly lowered his head in the wind and said nothing. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. However, just these things had no meaning. He was the strongest expert of the middle generation, ranked first on the proclamation of liberation, but he was not Zhu Luo's match. Zhu Luo was one of the storms of the 8 directions, a person who had already stepped into the divine domain. In Xuanyang City, in the entire continent, the only person who dared to look directly at, or even ignore, the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions, besides each other, was only one person. Su Li made no attempt to conceal his contempt and ridicule. Do you old things only know how to scare children now? He was referring to the 2 sentences that Zhu Luo had separately said to Wang Po and Chen Chongsheng. Without waiting for Zhu Luo's reply, Su Li's sword-like brows rose and he spoke again. I know that all of you want me to die. From many years ago, all of you wanted me to die, whether it was the Elder of Heavenly Secrets or you. Because when I was still very young, all of you already could not kill me, so all of you wanted to kill me even more. Based on the same principle, I think that in truth you really want Wang Pe to strike right now so that you can find an excuse to kill him? These words were very incisive, so the street was very quiet. The crowd could only pretend that they had not heard these words. Even Wang Pe himself found it inconvenient to react. Zhu Luo was expressionless and said nothing. As I get stronger and stronger, all of you want me to die more and more. Su Li sighed. Tianhai, that husband and wife by Yexing, you 8 pieces of trash, and now even old man Yin wants me to die, the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions. Besides Su Li himself, the continent had 13 supreme experts. At this moment, he had named 12 people. He accused these godlike existences of murdering him. I'm not unhappy, because I've never had any interest in standing together with you guys in the divine kingdom. He curled his lips and finally said, I'm just a little regretful. Back then, I should have killed you 8 pieces of trash. Not today. Chapter 397. There is no relationship between the 3 pines and the 5 pines. I haven't watched basketball in years. Because she had received a lot of care and concern, the reason why she took leave the day before yesterday, and the day before yesterday was not because something happened at home. In fact, it was because she was sick. It was a minor illness, a common cold and rhinitis, but it was really uncomfortable. Asking for sick leave is often easy to be accused of faking illness, which makes me very unhappy, so I'm used to asking for personal leave now. It's just that right now I'm still feeling very uncomfortable, sore all over, dizzy, and even my scalp hurts, so I'm writing very slowly to explain to you. As a person of virtue and prestige in the human world, one of the storms of the 8 directions that was like a god in the eyes of the common people, in Su Li's mouth, they were 8 pieces of trash. Moreover, one could not forget that at the very beginning, he had called them old bastard. That was not all. From his tone, it seemed that he could kill the strongest experts of the continent just by saying so. How arrogant and prideful! Even if he was the legendary junior martial uncle of Mountley, those who heard his words still felt that it was too exaggerated, even absurd. Zhu Luo's face did not reveal any ridicule due to the absurdity of the situation, nor did he show any anger. He was still as indifferent as before. As the sect master of the emotion-severing sect, his Tao heart had been cultivated to be completely emotionless. These 4 words did not have the meaning of being cruel and tyrannical. Instead, they were like the bright moon illuminating a snowy plain, aloof and desolate, unaffected by external objects and spiritual senses. He looked at Su Li and said, You don't have a chance. Yes, Su Li was about to die. Regardless of whether or not he had the ability to kill the storms of the 8 directions at his peak, or even threaten those 5 saints, he was about to leave this world. What had never happened could only become a mystery that disappeared into the long river of history. But Su Li did not think so. He looked at Zhu Luo and said, "Once I recover, the first thing I will do is go to Hangzhou City to kill you." His words were spoken in an extremely casual and indifferent manner, as if he didn't know that Zhu Luo had come to kill him, as if he didn't know that Xuanyang City was his burial ground, as if he would return to Mount Li in the next moment. Zhu Luo's long hair fluttered in the wind. His eyebrows moved slightly at the same time, finally revealing a trace of ridicule. "No, it shouldn't be going to Hangzhou City to kill you, but to Hangzhou City to kill your entire family," Su Li corrected him. Then he looked at Liang Wangsun at the front of the crowd and said, "This time, I will learn from my past experience and not make these mistakes again." "Senior, that's not right." Chen Chongqing held the reins and looked back at him. Yes, it was wrong to kill an entire family. Even if they didn't eliminate the root of the problem, it could lead to a wildfire in the future. On their journey back south, Su Li believed that he understood Chen Chongqing, this child, very well, but only now did he realize that he did not completely understand him. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "Then we won't kill his entire family, just him." It sounded like a joke, but in fact it was a joke. Su Li, who was about to die, had said that he would kill Zhu Luo's entire family in the future. How could he still have a future? Zhu Luo looked at him and said solemnly, "When you leave this world, can't you be serious for once?" Previously, the Archbishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jiefu, had said similar words to Chen Chongqing. "Is it proper to welcome death calmly? Then I don't like this sort of proper. Between dying on the battlefield, in the mountains, and dying on a comfortable bed and in the embrace of a beauty, I would naturally choose the latter." Su Li said, "Speaking of which, I really don't understand just what you old guys are living for. If we're talking about benefits, I can't see how much you can gain from this matter. It seems that you're also rather miserable. After all, this is Tianliang County. Those old guys can hide in their own dwellings and capitals, but you can't hide." After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo said, "There are some matters that have to be resolved sooner or later. From start to finish, this great personage of virtue and prestige from Tianliang County had no intention of appearing in Xuanyang City, because even he was unwilling to personally kill Su Li. At the very least, his hands could not be stained with Su Li's blood. Only when Wang Po appeared, his blade breaking through the snowy sky and the crowd retreating, did he have no choice but to appear. Su Li looked at him and jeered, "Then have you ever thought about how you'll resolve this matter in the future? Although there are many people in the South who want me to die, I'm still an idol of the South. If your hands are stained with my blood, then the anger of the Southerners will be borne by your Zhu clan and the emotion-severing sect. Have you mentally prepared yourself for this?" Zhu Luo said nothing. For a person like him, his Tao heart was immeasurable and the affairs of the world were clear. How could he not clearly calculate the current situation? However, just as he had said, since this matter had occurred in Tianliang County, he could only resolve it. After living for several hundred years, in the end, you still have to be used as a blade by others. Su Li looked at him sympathetically and said, "How did your mother give birth to an idiot like you? When your father in the underworld finds out that the Zhu clan will weaken day by day because of your decision today, will he regret giving birth to an idiot like you?" Sharp and ear-piercing, each word piercing the heart. However, it was not only because these words were profanities, but also because these words were not wrong. Words that were not wrong were swords. Given Su Li's ability, even if Zhu Luo's Tao heart was as firm as a rock, it would still leave behind a few marks. Zhu Luo looked at that fellow on the horse who was already so weak that he couldn't even raise his arm and said, "The torrential river is divided into two sides. Even if you only look and don't speak, you still have to choose a side." He was talking about Su Li, talking about why the entire continent wanted to kill Su Li. 10 some years ago, after the bloody incident in the Orthodox Academy, the great Zhou was in the midst of internal strife. The longevity sect and the Liang estate joined hands, intending to invade the north. However, Su Li was not willing, and even used the sword in his hand to break this major undertaking. For the past 100-some years, both the Tianhai Divine Empress and the Pope had wanted to unite the North and the South, but Su Li still would not do it. Relying on the sword in his hand, he stood in the South, forcefully stopping the momentum of the world from moving forward. In these two matters, no matter what Su Li chose, he would not fall into the current crisis. However, he chose neither. His attitude was extremely proud and clear. If I were a pillar, I should stand in the middle of the great river. If I were duckweed, I should go with the flow. I am Su Li, so why should I stand on the shore? Zhu Luo said no more. Mount Li will continue to exist, but it will no longer have you. This was respect and also a declaration. The streets of Xuanyang City were silent. The dark clouds gradually thickened, and more raindrops slowly drifted down. Is a Mount Li without me still Mount Li? Su Li expressionlessly gazed to the south. As he thought about what might be happening at Mount Li, his heart was heavy. This was not a declaration of arrogance, but worry. The entire continent believed that Su Li was Mount Li, but he actually did not believe this. He had entered the Mount Li sword sect as a child, so he knew that Mount Li had its own sword soul and spirit. However, the truth was that in these past several hundred years, he had been that green tree on the summit of Mount Li, sprinkling down its shade to protect the disciples of Mount Li. If he was no longer there, what would happen to Mount Li? Something had definitely happened to Mount Li. What was it? Could the disciples of Mount Li hold on? This was the only thing he was concerned about. In the end, I'm still inferior to Black Robe in this aspect. Su Li retracted his gaze and looked at Zhu Luo. Although he hasn't killed as many people as I have, his understanding of the dark side of human nature is truly above mine. The divine domain is still filled with the roiling dust of the mortal world. He understands all too well the intentions of you so-called protectors of the human world, but just what are you doing? Zhu Luo replied, sometimes the river of history needs to be reversed in order to advance with greater strength. To resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify the internal? Su Li looked at him and mocked. Then how about you advise those people of the Chern imperial clan not to think about becoming emperor? Or how about you advise Tianhai to abdicate? After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo spoke of a passage from the Taoist canon, containing some hidden meaning. What I don't like the most is the way you guys act. Su Li didn't care at all how many profound truths were contained in this passage from the Taoist canon. He said, it's not fun at all. It truly isn't fun. Xiao Zhang, who had been silent this entire time, shook his head. The rain-soaked white paper on his face made slapping sounds, as if he was slapping someone in the face. Then he turned around, carrying the metal spear on his back, and walked towards the end of the long street. He had come to Xuanyang City to kill Su Li. If someone came to kill him now, Su Li would definitely die, so what was the point of him staying? For a person like Su Li, even if he was heavily injured and unable to fight back, killing him was still interesting, but watching him die was not fun at all. Liang Wangsun did not leave, nor did those several hundred cultivators. They stood in the increasingly heavy rain, silently watching those people on the street. They were waiting to see how Su Li would die. Su Li stroked the wet mane of the fine horse beneath him and said, "You guys can go now." These words were obviously said to Chen Chongqing and Wang Po. Although he loathed calmly welcoming death or returning to the Sea of Stars, in the end, he still had to maintain some bearing. After all, he was the junior martial uncle of Mount Li. Su Li had thought about how a person should spend their life many times, but in the end, he still could not come to a conclusion. For the majority of the time, he still acted according to his own likes and dislikes. However, he had long since come to a conclusion about how a person's life should end. Dying at the hands of one of the storms of the 8 directions was very different from what he had imagined, but it was still barely acceptable. Chen Chongqing held the reins and lowered his head to look at the raindrops in front of his boots, saying nothing. Now that things had gotten to this point, there was no meaning in doing anything else. It was this world that wanted to kill Su Li, and the person on the other end of the rainy street was this world's strongest expert. No matter how fast or how strong his sword was, it was impossible for him to stop his opponent. Wang Po also said nothing, but he began to roll up his sleeve. His movements were very slow, very focused, very careful. He rolled up the sleeve on his right arm to his elbow. In this way, he should be able to wield his blade a little faster. Su Li's expression turned slightly cold. His previous heart-rending words, saying that Zhu Luo and the other storms of the 8 directions wanted to find a chance to kill a junior like Wang Po, was precisely to protect Wang Po's life. His hands were stained with too much blood. Zhu Luo could find many excuses after the fact, but killing Wang Po was different. Without a firm enough reason, any action against Wang Po could be interpreted as jealousy of the wise and ability. Because he did not want to be replaced by a shockingly talented junior, he could disregard the overall interests of humanity and mercilessly kill Wang Po. As long as Wang Po did not take the initiative to attack, under the watch of several hundred gazes, Zhu Luo would be unable to do anything to Wang Po. It was even to the extent that he and the other storms of the 8 directions would have to pay special attention to Wang Po's safety in the following period of time. But Wang Po had no intention of giving way. He rolled up his sleeve, exposing his arm, preparing to strike. The rainy street grew quieter and quieter. Su Li calmly looked at Wang Po. Zhu Luo calmly looked at Wang Po. Wang Po acted like he did not know anything. He began to use his sleeve to wipe his blade, his expression calm and focused, his movements slow and serious. Zhu Luo suddenly began to laugh, because he had finally truly become angry. One could not sense any anger from his smile, but Xuanyang City could sense it very clearly. The dark clouds in the sky pressed down even lower, and the rain instantly became torrential. This was the majesty of the divine domain, like the might of the heavens. Then, he withdrew his smile and looked at Wang Po with an expressionless face. "You are prepared to attack me?" Chapter 398. Zhu Luo's words seemed calm, but they were actually extremely unyielding and tyrannical. Everyone knew that these words actually meant, "You actually dare to attack me?" Wang Po's 2 feet did not move. He rolled up his sleeves and began to wipe his blade. He was only preparing for battle, but he had not even attacked. This already made Zhu Luo extremely angry, because it had been many years since someone had dared to attack him. The storms of the 8 directions were almost like gods. Any action that attempted to attack gods was provocation, blasphemy, seeking death. Even if it was just a gesture, it could not be accepted, even if that person was Wang Po of Tianliang. The people on the rainy street were also shocked. They did not understand why Wang Po would do this. He had no chance. Zhu Luo's level of cultivation had long ago surpassed the secular world and entered the divine domain. Not counting the White Emperor couple, there were 12 supreme experts in the human world, and he was one of them. Wang Po was ranked at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation, the undisputed supreme expert of the middle generation. Back then, he had truly shocked the world by entering the upper level of star condensation at the age of 40, but the distance from the Saint Realm was like the distance between the sea of stars and a swamp. Many people thought that Wang Po would enter the divine domain in the future and become a new generation of storms of the 8 directions, perhaps even achieving even greater accomplishments, but that was assuredly a matter of several decades or even several centuries. In front of Zhu Luo, the current Wang Po was just a junior that could only bow his head and receive instruction. Yet he wanted to attack Zhu Luo? Junior does not dare. Wang Po raised his head and calmly, even somewhat woodenly, stared at Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's expression gradually calmed, and the mood on the rainy street somewhat relaxed. Wang Po raised his blade and pointed it at this unshakable expert of the continent through the curtain of rain. "Senior, please go first." The streets were in an uproar. Even the increasingly violent sound of the rain could not drown out the cries of alarm and discussion. Zhu Luo's brows suddenly rose, and a majestic chi soared into the sky, scattering the torrential rain. Then he once more began to laugh, a cold and distant laughter resounding through all of Xuanyang City. "What a pity," Zhu Luo indifferently said, seeming somewhat regretful. "Because of the few people in the human world that had the greatest chance of entering the divine domain, one of them would die after today, without any more chances." "What a pity," Su Li sighed. He did not want Wang Po to die, so he did some things for him. However, Wang Po did not accept it, because Wang Po's path of the blade was different from his path of the sword. It was also different from Zhou Dufu's path of the blade back then. His blade emphasized on the word straight. When Wang Po rolled up his sleeves and wiped his blade, Su Li suddenly felt that this fellow's blade had the possibility of exploding with a radiance that was completely different from his and Zhou Dufu's, but perhaps even more interesting. Therefore, he felt that it was a pity. This world would probably feel regretful for not having the chance to see Wang Po's blade in the future. Liang Wangsun looked at Wang Po in the rain and said nothing. His emotions were somewhat complicated. In order to complete a few things, to completely experience one's life, to give up one's life and advance towards a place that could not be challenged, to geniuses like them, was not something too difficult to understand or accept. Therefore, even if he had to pay with his life, he still wanted to kill Su Li. It was just that in his spiritual world there was a vast sea of blood, so why did Wang Po do it? Was it really just based on the ideals in his heart? As soon as he thought of this, he suddenly felt a lot of admiration. He thought to himself, no wonder he had been unable to catch up to this person in the past 30 years. No wonder no matter how crazily Xiao Zhang cultivated, he could not compare to this person. No wonder Sun Mei could only imprison himself in the mausoleum of books for the past 30 years. Only when he was about to die did he rely on his transcendence of life and death to stand shoulder to shoulder with this person. Chen Chongqing was also looking at Wang Po. He didn't say anything, nor did he think too much about it. He just subconsciously sighed in admiration. He felt that Wang Po was very handsome, and for some reason, he felt a sense of closeness. And then he understood. Wang Po was very similar to many of the people by his side. No, it should be that many of the people he knew were similar to Wang Po in certain aspects, such as Zhixiu, Tang 36, Go Hanshi, and himself. Those similarities were often the most dazzling, such as persistence, gentleness, determination, willpower, pride, silence. Chen Chongqing saw everything about himself and his friends in Wang Po. He wore an old robe, but there were countless rays of light. He saw the beauty of Chen Chujian in Wang Po, and he even saw Neng. "Even though I know that I am no match for you, I still want to fight you to the death." This sort of person was truly extraordinary. Besides his senior brother Yu Ren, Chen Chongqing felt that he had another person to learn from in his life of cultivation. Thus he began to learn. He rolled up his sleeves, and at the same time unsheathed the dragoncry dagger. Just at this moment, Wang Po inserted the hilt of the dagger into the opening of the sheath. With a crack, the dagger and the sheath became one, transforming into a large blade. Then, his two hands slowly tightened around the hilt of the dagger, and he stared straight at Zhu Luo. Chen Chongqing thought to himself that it really was a great coincidence. He inserted the hilt of the dagger into the opening of the sheath, and as a result, the dagger became a broadsword with a very long hilt. He also tightly gripped the hilt of the dagger with both hands, staring straight at Zhu Luo. Just like this, separated by a distance of over 10 zhang, one in front and one behind, they stood in the rain. Su Li sat on his horse, the rain washing his face. It was somewhat pale, but his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Zhu Luo walked over. The rain did not become heavier, but the wind became even more damp and cold, and the light became incomparably dim. Some people raised their heads to look at the sky, and saw that the dark clouds in the sky had become much darker. Drinking alone under the moon did not go on blind date. His Tao was to sever all emotions and extinguish his nature, to be incomparably pure and lonely. As his footsteps rose and fell, the fallen leaves in the rain were suddenly jolted up, carrying the droplets of water with them as they danced in the cold wind. As these wet leaves danced, there was a desolate feeling that enveloped the long street. Several groans and cries of pain came from the crowd. Those wet leaves that had been blown by the strong intent were like arrows, cutting several cultivators. Only then did the people come to their senses, and understand just how frightening the following battle was. One by one, they fled to even more distant alleys. In just an instant, the long street became even quieter, empty. Empty was not the right word, because there was still the torrential rain. In the torrential rain, the true unstoppable storm of the continent was currently slowly approaching. Wang Pe held his blade, Chen Chongqing led the horse, and Su Li sat on the horse, facing the storm. Standing at the very front was Wang Pe. With a light clang, the metal blade rose up against the rain, held horizontally in front of him. Wang Pe did not move, because he was a junior, and Zhu Luo was a senior. Zhu Luo naturally would not take advantage of him. He raised his hand and lightly tapped in the heavy curtain of rain, as if he had struck out. A muffled clap of thunder resounded in front of Wang Pe. The wind howled and the rain poured down, as if a waterfall had been formed there. The wet leaves continued to dance in the rain. Zhu Luo slowly walked over, his black cloak also dancing in the rain. Wang Pe's face paled several degrees. His blade domain was enduring an unimaginable pressure. In the air in front of him, the rain flew chaotically. Several hundred scars constantly appeared and then disappeared. These scars were the result of Zhu Luo's qi colliding with his blade domain. Zhu Luo did not intentionally raise his qi. He only slowly walked over, treating him like a distinguished guest. The difference in strength between him and Zhu Luo was far too obvious. Zhu Luo's sword intent had not been fully released, but it had already emptied the long street. Even the soundless walls on the two sides of the street had been cut into countless deep scars by the dancing leaves in the storm. Wang Pe's hand that gripped the hilt of his blade trembled, his knuckles somewhat white. The torrential rain had drenched his entire body. Countless droplets of rain dripped down, and it was unknown how much of it was sweat. In this one encounter, he knew that the golden wind could not blow away the jade dew. He was no match for Zhu Luo, but he still had no intention of turning around and leaving. He did not retreat a single step. His blade still held horizontally in front of him, like a dike or a mountain. No matter how fierce the storm was, that dike still did not collapse, that mountain still stood before him, unparalleled and unparalleled. Seeing that blade that had been washed by the rain and growing colder, sensing the unyielding will and unimaginable strength coming from the blade, Zhu Luo slightly arched his brows, feeling rather surprised. Even farther away, Shui was even more shocked, speechless. Wang Pe's blade was actually stronger than anyone had imagined. His blade could actually endure the pressure of the divine domain. How had he done it? Shui used a blade. Now that he saw that tall and thin man on the rainy street, he finally completely understood what Su Li had meant with those words he had said to him. Wang Pe only used a single blade. Only one blade, only one path of the blade. Only this way was it pure enough, strong enough. Before Wang Pe, the most famous grandmaster of the blade on the continent was Zhou Dufu. Zhou Dufu also only cultivated a single path of the blade, the path of killing. He used life and death to break life and death. Wang Pe could not learn Zhou Dufu's blade, so he walked his own path. He walked a straight path. Wang Pe's path of the blade could be summed up in one word: straight. This straight, it was straight. He walked straight, and when he kept accounts, he wrote very straight strokes. He would never make a mistake in his calculations. When he saw and did things, he always relied on his likes and dislikes, his likes and dislikes. It seemed like even his intestines were straight. So even though he was unspeakably wretched, when his blade left its sheath, it was assuredly sharp and cold, as straight as a mountain cliff. How could even the fiercest storm destroy a cliff in such a short amount of time? Zhu Luo had already moved. Now it was Wang Po's turn. When he moved, he naturally used his blade. When he moved, he used his blade. He gripped the long hilt of his blade and slashed at Zhu Luo through the tempest and torrential rain. Without question, this was assuredly the strongest blade of Wang Po's life, because Zhu Luo was assuredly the strongest opponent he had encountered in his life. If not for Su Li, logically speaking, before he stepped into the threshold of the Saint Realm, he would have had no reason to fight with Zhu Luo, and for the benefit of humanity as a whole, Zhu Luo would also not have attacked him. In other words, this battle had occurred several decades in advance, perhaps even 100 years. The blade energy flourished, its edge piercing through all the curtains of rain and arriving in front of Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo still had no intention of using his sword. He attacked again. This time, he stuck out 2 fingers. Wang Po's blade stopped in the torrential rain, unable to descend any further. Separated by Tensum Zhang, Zhu Luo's 2 fingers transformed into a storm and clamped down on Wang Po's strongest blade. It was just like how Liang Wangsun had used 2 fingers to clamp down on Qin Chongqing's sword. The difference in strength between Qin Chongqing and Liang Wangsun was as great as the difference between Wang Po and Zhu Luo, perhaps even greater. The distance between the secular world and the divine had always been insurmountable. The storm and the blade met on the long street, locked in a stalemate. The wet fallen leaves were still drifting in the air. With a sharp swishing sound, several tears appeared on Wang Po's clothes. In the end, his blade domain was not perfect, especially after he attacked with his blade. For the supreme expert of the continent like Zhu Luo, his eyes were the intellectual sword. A fallen leaf, seemingly in accord with the supreme principles of the world, avoided Wang Po's blade energy and floated down on the blade. An unimaginable amount of true essence followed this leaf and simultaneously descended. The blade fell like a large mountain. Wang Po's face was snow-white, blood seeping from the corner of his lips. His blade domain had been broken. What to do? He suddenly took a step forward. Then he lowered his waist, bent his knees, and turned his wrist. He drew back his blade. The blade flew through the rain, returning with a light clang. The fallen leaf was instantly reduced to shreds. Su Li's cheers resounded through the torrential rain. Good blade. Using words to present an image is truly very difficult. I've always paid great attention to this aspect, and I personally believe that I've always done a good job. But when the real image appears, it will definitely have a different kind of beauty. Recently, the film adaptation of Choosing the Heavens will slowly begin. This will definitely be an extremely long process. The concept film I made in advance feels pretty good. In a little while, I'll send it to WeChat for everyone to see. See you tomorrow. Chapter 399. The blade that Wang Pa had chopped at Zhu Luo at the very beginning was the strongest blade he had ever used in his life. Su Li did not react at all. At this moment, Wang Pa withdrew his blade, but his cheers pierced through the torrential rain and fell into everyone's ears. Because besides Zhu Luo, he was the only expert walking in the divine domain. Only he could understand just how difficult it was for Wang Pa to sheath his blade. And this strike had cut through that wet leaf. What did this mean? This meant that Wang Pa had seen through the storm that Zhu Luo had brought with him. For an upper-level star condensation cultivator to be able to cross the threshold and see the laws of that world was just an inconceivable matter. Seeing through it was already an extremely difficult task, let alone striking it. Wang Po's comprehension of the path of the blade was truly so deep that it did not seem like he had only cultivated for a few decades. It seemed like he had already immersed himself in it for several hundred years. Su Li had seen countless cultivation geniuses in his life and had personally taught Qiushan Jun, Qi Jian, and Chen Chongxing, but he was still stunned by the talent hidden within this strike. The blade, washed by the rain, clashed with the wet leaf in the air. Anything that was wet would become heavy. Right now, this leaf was as heavy as a mountain, but it still couldn't resist the cleaving of the metal blade. With a muffled boom, the wet leaf turned into countless fragments that flew in all directions. It was as if a rapidly expanding ball had appeared on the gloomy rainy street. Berserk true essence accompanied the countless leaves. The hard stone ground was pierced with countless holes, and the walls of the street that had long since been scarred by the blade were cut into piles of sand. Wang Pe held his blade horizontally in front of him, the blade domain once more spreading out. His body, as well as Chen Chongxing, who was holding the reins, and Su Li, who was on the horse, were all protected behind the metal blade. The dense and crisp sounds of collisions resounded through the street, like tens of thousands of needles simultaneously falling on the smooth metal surface, an unending chain. The wind in the torrential rain also grew even faster, blowing at everything. Several li away, in the ruins of an inn, an exquisite abacus rested in the dirty water. The beads of the abacus fluttered in the wind, giving off a crisp clatter. It truly was like a piece of music. The wind and rain gradually ceased, the street gradually grew quiet, and the beads on the abacus gradually came to a stop. Wang Pe still stood in the same place, not moving a single step. The iron blade was still in his hand, and he had no intention of putting it down. However, his complexion was already very pale, and his plain clothes were full of tears and bloodstains. The streets were quiet. Water dripped from the remaining eaves, but no one felt annoyed, because no one cared about such things. Chen Chongxing no longer had the reins in his hands. He gripped his sword with both hands and looked forward with a serious and focused gaze. Separated by Wang Pe's shoulder, he looked at the undefeatable expert who was like a god. Wang Pe had already suffered severe injuries. Zhu Luo had yet to make a move. No matter how one looked at it, Wang Pe had already been defeated. However, he had still managed to block Zhu Luo for a moment, which was already very impressive. Now, it was naturally his turn to block the attack. Zhu Luo did not notice Chen Chongxing's actions. With a slightly surprised expression, he looked at Wang Pu and said, "I didn't expect that you haven't even cultivated to the very peak of star condensation, and you're still extremely far from being half a step into the saint realm, yet you're already able to pry into a few of the peripheral laws of the divine domain?" Wang Pe said, "All things share the same principle. The secular world and the divine have their places of connection." Zhu Luo said, "With such talent, such comprehension, it's no wonder you dare to attack me. But what meaning is there?" Yes, in this entire affair, Wang Pe's talent and unswerving determination had no meaning whatsoever. Because he could not defeat Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's sword was still in its sheath, but he was still able to make the strongest expert of the proclamation of liberation covered in blood and heavily injured. His name shook the world, obscured by the wind and rain. His strength was truly unimaginable. The difference between the two was in age, in cultivation, in that abyss that separated the divine from the secular. It was not something that talent and willpower could bridge. How could Wang Pe not be defeated? But some people did not see it this way. "You've lost," Su Li said. The crowd in the distance watched the battle. Upon hearing these words, they were filled with confusion, thinking, just how is this possible? Wang Pe's entire body was covered in blood. He was clearly heavily injured, so how could he have the slightest chance of victory? Su Li sat on his horse and looked at Zhu Luo. "Losing to a junior like this, don't tell me you don't feel ashamed?" The hair on Zhu Luo's shoulders slowly floated in the wind, as did his two eyebrows. However, just when he was about to say something, he calmed down and lowered his head to look at himself. There were no wounds there, nor were there any bloodstains. There was only a corner of his robe slowly drifting down. An extremely small piece of his left sleeve had been cut off. Whether it was Zhu Luo or any cultivator of any level, this would not affect their battle prowess. But seeing that piece of cloth drift down into the rain in front of his feet, Zhu Luo did not say anything for a very long time. Seeing this scene, the crowd was silent. They thought to themselves, could it be that he really has lost? How did he lose? No one understood Su Li's words or Zhu Luo's silence. Chen Chongqing also did not understand, but Liang Wangsun vaguely understood. Wang Po understood, but he did not accept it. Victory and defeat, on the surface, had exactly the same meaning. It was just that, in certain moments, in certain special circumstances, defeat did not mean that you had lost. For example, a scoundrel dressed in black and white had his head smashed into the cement, but he still picked up a piece of wood and lightly smashed the bald head of a peerless villain. This was meaningless, but he had won. Su Li naturally would not use this kind of judgment to evaluate the first exchange between Wang Pu and Zhu Luo. Wang Pu had naturally lost, indisputably, as a matter of course, and as a matter of course. However, he still believed that the one who had lost was Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's current reaction indicated that, on a certain level, he approved of Su Li's words. When Zhou Dufu was 3 years old, was he already able to defeat an unparalleled expert under the heavens? When the Tianhai Empress had just entered the palace, just who could she defeat? When you were Wang Po's age, could you defeat him? This was what Su Li wanted to say to Zhu Luo. It sounded rather unreasonable, but it was actually very reasonable. It was just that this reasoning could only be understood in the domain of the strongest people on the continent. Chen Chongqing understood. Somewhat at a loss, he thought to himself, if we were to compare people of the same age, then there's still Su Yorong and Lady Chen Chujian. Aren't I the strongest? Su Li did not know what Chen Chongqing was thinking, or else he would definitely have laughed at him. He continued to say to Zhu Luo, there's another problem. You've regressed too much. Zhu Luo said nothing, displeased. The drizzle fell, not daring to touch the cloak on his body, avoiding and drifting away. Back then, you were able to kill the second demon general with a single sword reflecting the moon. How can the current you be a match for Heidi? The confident and unrestrained man who once wrote poems and killed people is now old and without any drive. That's fine, but you just happen to be someone who doesn't have the slightest magnanimity. You can't even compare to that woman Tianhai. For several hundred years, you didn't dare to take a single step into the capital, and now you actually want to borrow the power to kill a junior that might threaten your position. TSK, you really are quite promising. Su Li continued, why? You're old, almost 1,000 years old. You should have died long ago. To be old and not die, what is that? It's a thief, an old thief. People are just like trees. When they're at their strongest, they should do their utmost to swagger in the spring winds. When they've lived for too long, they should still struggle to live. When their bodies age and turn into rotten wood, when they're finally struck by lightning, what meaning is there in that? Zhu Luo finally opened his mouth. Looking at him, he asked, are you done? Su Li replied, I'm done cursing. Zhu Luo said, what you say is reasonable. Su Li's sword-like eyebrows perked up. Somewhat interested, he asked, how so? Zhu Luo said, this is your second sword. Every word struck the heart, every sentence a sword. Su Li was heavily injured and unable to fight, but his sword heart still existed, so his words could still hurt. Su Li calmly looked at him, confirming that this old fellow really did have the qualifications to be absolutely arrogant. He was actually not affected in the slightest. I received 2 of your swords, so now it's my turn to use my sword. Saying this, Zhu Luo's right hand, like a dragon breaking through the clouds, moved to his waist and gripped the hilt of his sword. The dark clouds descended once more, the rain fell once more, the sky darkening once more. Fallen leaves fell one after another, filling the sky with droplets of water. Zhu Luo unsheathed his sword. The sword was not bright, nor did it seem to have anything special about it. However, the edge of the dark clouds that enveloped Xuanyang City suddenly brightened, as if they had been plated with a layer of silver. Was that a halo of light? What was behind the clouds? Was it the sun? No, that was the moon of the demons that should not have appeared in the human world. That was Zhu Luo's past, his greatest glory. Many years ago, in the snowy plains, he saw that bright moon and recited a very beautiful poem. He killed a very powerful opponent, and thus became an expert of his generation on the continent, gaining the title of drinking alone under the moon. Finally, this expert revealed to Xuanyang City the true scene of the Saint Realm. Separated by layers upon layers of rain and countless wet leaves, Chen Chongqing could sense that majestic and dignified energy of light. He felt his body grow stiffer and stiffer, and even subconsciously wanted to avoid it. This was the Saint Realm? As it turned out, the domain here was not the star domain of the star condensation realm. A field of light enveloped everything without any distinction, so how could one attack it? He had studied the Taoist canon since he was a child, so in terms of experience and knowledge, he would not lose to anyone. However, he could not understand the light at the edge of the dark clouds or the light brought by that sword, because the operating rules of the divine domain had already surpassed his ability to understand. The pitch-black torrential rain, the bright sword, the leaden clouds that seemed about to burn. In front of this spectacular backdrop, Wang Po's figure seemed even smaller, as if he could be swallowed up at any moment. "Forget it!" Chen Chongqing yelled at him. Wang Po did not turn around. "I still want to try again. It's not easy to have this sort of experience." The torrential rain washed over his face, devoid of fear or joy. Just like his voice, it was so calm that it made one's heart palpitate and feel respect. This was true serenity, the serenity of hearing the Tao in the morning and dying in the evening without regret. Chen Chongqing said no more, knowing that he had learned a few more things. Zhu Luo's sword arrived. The world was either light or darkness. The sword came. The dark storm brought with it light. No matter how big the world was, there was no corner that could be avoided. Not even Wang Po could avoid it. He once more struck out with his blade. Without any novelty, he swung his blade in a straight line, but where the blade energy landed, it was brimming with novelty. He did not strike at that sword glow, did not strike at the falling leaves, did not strike at Zhu Luo Tensum Zhang away, but at the wind and rain. The wind and rain moved through space. Wang Po's blade descended in a straight line, cleaving apart the pillars of rain, cleaving apart the wisps of wind, cleaving apart space. With a swish, a gloomy opening appeared on the rainy street. As long as one was in this world, there was no way to avoid Zhu Luo's sword? Then let's cut open a new path and go together to a new world.